A Suitor for the Spurned Mail-Order Bride. Westbound Hearts Book 1. By Blythe Carver. Prologue. Daniel West and his three sisters, Rose, Emma, and Amelia, sat around the dinner table, chatting like they always did. Daniel and his sisters were close, a tightly knit family of siblings left to their own devices 10 years ago when their parents were murdered while traveling on a train. The story was that a man tried to rob them. Their father put up a fight, and both he and their mother were shot dead as a result. The man was caught and spent 3 years in prison before he was hung for their double murder. Since then, the siblings were financially supported by their uncle, Clarence West, their father's brother. He was the one who doled out their allowances. It had long been disputed that the riches he had, and the money their parents left them, should have been in Daniel's care when he turned 21. As it was, he was a grown man of 27, and it was high time he controlled the family finances. Unfortunately, Clarence West was a man of many talents. One of them was manipulation. He kept the money from the siblings, making what sounded like reasonable claims of concern about how it would be spent, should they have free rein over it. For 5 years, Daniel had been finding ways to go around his uncle's restrictions to get the things he wanted. And the things he wanted were basic needs that any young man would want, an education for one. And that was the most important thing on Daniel's mind. He didn't want to be a useless member of society, living off his family riches and meandering around listlessly, going from saloon to saloon, drinking it all away without a thought in his head. Daniel prided himself on his intelligence. He'd wanted to use it from the age of 11, when he noticed a discrepancy in the account of an event told by 2 different sources and wanted to dig until he'd found the truth of the matter. He'd ended up exposing the mayor for transgressions that had cost the town money. His uncle didn't notice the small victory for the 11-year-old. He hadn't acknowledged it in any way. He couldn't from his mansion in New York City. That event took place 6 years before the Wests were murdered. Daniel hadn't expected or asked for any recognition from his uncle. It wasn't until after Clarence had control that Daniel noticed he and his sisters had been ignored by the man nearly all their lives. He often wondered why his father trusted his brother enough to give him the executorship of the will. In order to pay for his schooling, Daniel had to turn to the dark side. At least on paper. He'd started sending his uncle messages soon after the death of his parents, claiming to be in trouble with gambling debts. He said he feared for his life. He told the most outrageous stories he could, begging his uncle for extra money. And every cent went to paying for books, supplies, and tutors, plus tuition. Daniel was not a stupid man. He looked around the table at his sisters. He had a plan in motion to free them of their uncle's dictatorship. He hadn't quite decided if he wanted to tell them or not. He'd been working in the law office with his friend, Bertram Smith, for nearly 6 months, trying to find a way around the will of his parents in order to take control of the West finances. He was about to interrupt their laughing and chatter when the door knocker banged loudly on the door 3 times. His sisters, unaccustomed to company, all turned wide eyes toward him. "Is someone supposed to be coming over?" Emma asked, her voice light and airy. "Daniel, you're so awful for not telling us someone was coming," Amelia shot at him overtop her sister, one hand going up to her hair to pat it down. "I didn't invite anyone over," he said, standing up as Johnson, their butler, brought in Henry Lancaster, familiar to the siblings as their uncle's lawyer. Daniel felt his heart thump hard in his chest. He blinked nervously. Had Clarence found out he was looking for ways to get out from under the man's thumb and free himself and his sisters? He reviewed everything in his mind to make sure he hadn't done anything illegal. Even if he hadn't, Clarence might be deceitful enough to make it appear so. He licked his lips and swallowed, stepping forward with his hand out. He forced himself to smile and relax. "Henry, to what do we owe this pleasure?" Henry smiled at Daniel and turned that smile to the sisters, who had also stood when he came in the room. For a moment, Daniel was confused. Henry seemed extremely chipper for someone who might be bringing devastating news to the siblings. Perhaps he wasn't in trouble, after all. Perhaps Clarence didn't know what he'd been doing. I am happy to see the four of you doing so well, Henry said, bowing slightly from the waist at each of the sisters. He was a short, plump man with a thin blonde mustache that didn't quite fit his round face as well as he probably thought it did. But Daniel had always gotten along with him, and suspected he wasn't a huge fan of Clarence either. Would you like to sit and have coffee and breakfast with us? Emma asked, holding out her hand to the table. Henry glanced at the hot food with a look of extreme desire but shook his head. No, thank you. No time. I only stopped by to give you the news. What news? Daniel asked, his voice tight with apprehension. Henry looked him directly in the eye. It's your Uncle Clarence, he said. He's had a heart attack and died. The funeral is tomorrow. The will reading the next day. You need to be there. Daniel felt numb. He and his sister shared stunned looks. We'll be there, he said, his voice hollow.
Chapter 1. Anna Dawson looked in the mirror, smiling wide. Oh my, she gushed, running her eyes over the new hairdo her friend Ethel had created for her. You've done such a lovely job. What would I do without you? Ethel laughed and hugged her friend around the shoulders, lowering herself to look at Anna in the mirror. Why, you would have dull hair, obviously. I'm so glad you like it. She pulled away from Anna, still looking at her in the mirror. Anna rose, patting the big blonde curls that hung in ringlets around her head. It really was a style that suited her narrow face and fine features. Her blue eyes sparkled in the sunlight that came through the window, and she was momentarily impressed with the picture she presented. She wasn't an egotistical girl, but she knew when she was looking good. You're a miracle worker, Ethel. Ha! Ethel snorted, shaking her head. Not with your hair, I'm not. It's that hair that's the miracle. Let's go downstairs. Everyone will be here real soon. Anna followed her best friend down to the main floor. The living room in Ethel's home took up most of the space in Ethel's cottage on that floor, while the bedroom she shared with her husband Frank took up the space on the second floor. When Anna had arrived for the bridal shower Ethel was holding for her, she'd been amazed by the decor and beauty of the living room where the party would be held. Stepping in the room a second time gave Anna the same feeling. She shook her head, taking in the deep pink, orange, and off-white paper flowers, baskets, and streamers. It looked so calm, so well put together. You really have an eye for colors, Ethel, she said, looking all around the room. This is so beautiful. Ethel stopped where she was and held up one flat hand, indicating different parts of the room as she spoke. I just think these colors represent the kind of woman you are, Anna. You are so collected and intelligent. You give off such a good feeling, at least to me, and when I'm upset I always want to find you. I know you'll just naturally make me feel better. You are so flattering. Anna couldn't help giggling as she took a seat on the couch. Ethel was right about one thing. The room did give off a feeling of comfort and calm. She could live there. I think you've given me an idea for how I want to decorate my home. What do you think Sean would say about these colors? I imagine he wouldn't mind them, Ethel replied, moving to the table and examining it to make sure everything was where it was supposed to be. She looked behind her at Anna. But then again, I don't think he'll care much about decor in your home. I doubt that's very important to him. Anna nodded. Ethel was probably right. Sean was a businessman, somewhat strict with himself, his employees, and his personal relationships. He spent a lot of time at the office, and if she was honest with herself, Anna didn't really see a lot of him. It had been at least 2 months since he'd taken her out to dinner or to a party. But he'd asked her to marry him and she'd said yes. She planned to make some changes after they married. She would insist that he take her out and show her a good time. He'd always been good to her, ever since they started courting a year ago. Sean came from a highly successful family that ran a factory which made ammunition. During the war, they had become extremely rich, one of the few factories that was able to keep up with supply and demand. Not to mention the fact that they sold to both sides of the war, doubling their sales. Sean was proud of his family name and wealth, and had no qualms about throwing money around to get his way. He was fond of name-dropping, getting discounts or things for free, and special privileges by mentioning his father dined with a certain senator or even with the president. Anna knew he was a prideful man, but was sure he wouldn't be that way with her when they were married. He would be the same old Sean who liked to come up behind her and scare her, and then laugh hysterically when he made her practically jump out of her shoes. Anna smiled. He was a playful man. He would make her happy, and she would do anything she could to make him happy too. The doorbell rang. Anna watched as Ethel crossed the room in front of her, singing, "They're here, everyone is here, this is going to be fun." Anna smiled, standing up to wait for her friends and family to enter. She didn't mind nodding a dozen times, shaking hands, saying hello, over and over. These ladies were here to celebrate her upcoming wedding with her. She was grateful they had shown up. She glanced at the gift table once everyone was inside, grateful to see the many brightly colored packages there, some of them odd shapes, most of them rectangles and squares. She turned to her guests. "Thank you all so much for coming to my party. And thank you, Ethel, for doing this for me. It all looks so beautiful. I can't wait to see the presents you all chose for me, but we have some prizes for you all too. I'm not the only one leaving here with a gift. In fact, we have door prizes for everyone so no one will leave empty-handed." A soft cheer ran through the room and several ladies laughed in delight. It was the beginning of a lovely evening for Anna, that was only marred 15 minutes into the frivolity when a latecomer interrupted them. Nan Bundle, one of Anna's childhood friends who had remained more of a casual acquaintance through the years. Ethel had invited her last minute to have an even count of ladies at the party. Anna remembered thinking how odd it was that Ethel needed an even count, but she let her friend run with it. She was the one planning it, after all. "You are so lucky, Anna," one of her guests, Emma, said, as they all sat around the living room, absorbing the atmosphere and chatting with one another. She was sitting casually, one leg up on the couch, her back against the corner, her body stretched out in front of her. One hand was clutched around a wine glass, and the other was propping up her head. She smiled at her friend as she raised her wine glass. "Here's to the lucky ones." "You're pretty lucky yourself," another guest remarked, grinning at Emma. "You've been married to a fine man for 5 years now." Emma saluted the speaker with her wine glass. 6. "And thank you. Yes, James is a true godsend. That's why I raise my glass to yet another lucky woman." Several ladies laughed. Anna looked around at her guests, happy that they were enjoying the party. "Time for presents," Ethel announced. Anna raised her eyebrows, pretending to look surprised. "Oh, there are presents. You didn't have to." Ethel grinned at her. "We can take them back if you like." Anna laughed. "Don't you dare. Bring them over here, I'm anxious to see what you ladies got me." As she went through the presents, she noticed something odd. There were several handmade blankets, a few trinkets, some ceramic kittens and cats. She was well known as a lover of anything feline-related, and things for her future home. Out of the more than 24 ladies that had attended the party, 4 of them chose to leave her a card, signed only with their name. She didn't say anything. The cards were sent by people she didn't really know. She could understand Nan's. She was the last person to be asked, and didn't have enough time to buy a gift. She didn't know Anna well anyway. But it was strange, Anna thought, not to include even a note of well wishes. To sign only a name implied it wasn't a card given of their free will, but practically forced upon them in order to get free food and socialize at a bridal shower. She put the cards with the other gifts, and thanked them all for their generosity and kindness. "You deserve only the best, Anna," Ethel said, raising her glass in the air. The other ladies followed suit. "You and your lovely hair will make the most beautiful bride in the whole state." Laughter rang out through the room and they all drank to her, all except Nan Bundle and 3 others. Chapter 2. Anna sat back in the chair, biting her bottom lip, watching with admiring eyes as Sean stoked the fire with an iron poker. Sparks flew as he tossed on a new log and pushed it through the ones that were already burning. It was chilly, 2 days before their wedding, a calm and peaceful Friday night in Lerner, New York. Desire and love for her soon-to-be husband filled her chest with a familiar warmth. He turned and smiled at her, running one hand through his brown hair as he came toward her. "You look very comfortable," he said, plopping down on the couch next to her. He took her legs and put them over his own, running his hands down her shins to her feet. She watched in tingling surprise as he removed her slip-on shoes. "You have such tiny feet," he said, rubbing them with his strong fingers. Chills ran up her legs from the massage. "Oh, Sean, that feels delightful," she gushed, smiling at him. "Nothing but the best for my future bride. You deserve it." Anna was on top of the clouds. She had never felt such happiness. She leaned forward and put her arms around his neck, pulling him into a hug and kissing his cheek. He laughed. She was amused by the color that came to his cheeks. "That's exactly what Ethel said," she said with a laugh. "You and she have been talking, haven't you? How can we butter up Anna?" Sean laughed. "We'd have no reason to butter you up, my dear. You have nothing we need. Our only reason for buttering you up is because we love you." He lifted one of his hands and touched her small nose with one finger. He bopped it with each word. "We love you, Anna." Anna was struck by his words. She blinked at him, wondering if he understood that he'd just mixed an insult in with an endearment. Anna was raised by her mother's sister, Abigail, and Abigail's husband, Stephen. They were good people who worked hard to provide her with everything they could. But they weren't wealthy. In fact, they lived hand to mouth, sometimes going without so Anna could have all she wanted. Anna had been determined to make something of herself, so she could give Aunt Abigail and Uncle Steve a relaxing second half of their lives. They'd worked so hard to provide a good childhood for her. Landing a husband like Sean was a dream come true. She wouldn't have met him but for Ethel, who grew up 3 blocks down from Anna in a very large house with a very rich family. Ethel had taken to Anna right away, and they were friends from the time they were 6 years old. Ethel introduced Anna to Sean, and the relationship had taken off from there. Anna had pushed for the marriage from the beginning, subtly she hoped. She was over the moon when he actually asked her. She saw all of her dreams fulfilled when Sean asked for her hand in marriage. She would have gorgeous children, as she and Sean were good-looking. She would be able to provide for Aunt Abby and Uncle Steve. She would be set for life. She would have a tremendous allowance every week to spend however she liked. What more could a girl want? "You know what was strange at my bridal shower?" she asked, sitting back, her eyes on his face as he rubbed her feet and stared into the fire. He turned his head to look at her with curious eyes. "What's that?" he asked. "I got 4 cards. 4 cards that were only signed." Sean snorted with laughter. "Really? Well, that seems pretty rude, doesn't it?" She nodded. "That's what I thought too. Are you sure they weren't accompanying a gift, and just got separated?" Anna shook her head. "No, I could account for all the gifts. I knew who they all came from. The cards were signed just like the gifts. I know who they came from." Sean raised his eyebrows. "And so what does that mean? Did you expect a gift of some kind from everyone?" Anna was ashamed. It seemed she'd been thinking selfishly. She nodded. "You're right, of course. I shouldn't have been expecting a gift from everyone. And I didn't really. I was just surprised by 4 cards with nothing but a signature, not even well wishes." Sean tilted his head to the side. "Sounds like you should be thinking about other people's circumstances once in a while, my dear. Not everyone is as fortunate as you to have someone like me here to keep your head above water." Anna knew Sean was right. She'd struggled for 22 years to achieve her goals. It was only when Sean came into her life did she see them begin to happen. She thought she should listen to him more often. He was obviously the wise one out of the 2 of them. But as the night wore on, after Anna left Sean's house and went back to her aunt and uncle's, she had more time to think about what had happened and what Sean said. She truly hadn't been expecting a gift from all the women, especially Nan, simply because she'd been the last-minute addition. When Anna told Sean who the women who'd sent the letters were, he was quick to defend them, telling Anna she was too self-centered and should work on that flaw. He'd made her feel bad when she didn't think she deserved it. It hurt her heart to think she'd disappointed him, but hadn't she disappointed herself too by not standing up for herself? Had she been wrong to think Sean should have encouraged and supported her in her confusion and curiosity, rather than making her feel guilty and ashamed? By the time she went in the front door of the cottage she lived in with her aunt and uncle, Anna was wide awake, energized by the events of the night. She didn't want to question Sean. He was smart, he knew what he was talking about. He was coming from a logical point of view, after all, something Anna had trouble with. He told her plenty of times to stop overthinking and start listening to what he was telling her. He was the man in the family, he said. He was the brains in the family too. He was the one who would do all the thinking. She simply needed to sit back, be quiet and look pretty. That was all that was required of her. Anna undressed and lay down in bed, lacing her fingers behind her head. She stared up at the ceiling, where the tree branches outside her window cast shadows inside that danced like wild animals. She was happy about the placement of her window and those trees. She'd been in the room across the hall until she'd realized this one was bigger, and asked her aunt if she could switch. Her aunt had readily agreed. The first night Anna noticed the dancing shadows, she had her bed in a different place. She'd moved it, and now, whenever her thoughts were restless, she would lay back and watch them, pretending they were living beings dancing for her entertainment. The best thing about it was that they never tired. The bad thing was that if there was no moon, there was no dancing. Tonight there was dancing. Anna thought about her upcoming wedding, and how amazing it would all be. Sean's mother had taken it upon herself to plan it, and they, of course, paid for everything since Abby and Stephen weren't in the financial position to do so. Because of that, Anna really didn't know what to expect. Sean's mother, Caroline, hadn't asked her opinion about anything at all. The only thing Anna had been in control of was her wedding dress. Caroline had given Anna a budget, and she took Ethel with her to pick it out. They traveled all the way to New York City to look for the best dress they could find. Anna was eager to walk down the aisle to her handsome new husband. She was anxious to move to the big house on the hill and call herself a married woman. Married to one of the wealthiest young men in southern New York. She would be a socialite, going to all the fanciest dinners and parties, hanging off the arm of her man. She tried not to think about the disrespect the ladies at her bridal shower had shown her. She didn't know why it should bother her so much, anyway. They weren't really her friends. If one of the cards had come from Ethel, that would be different. She would probably sob relentlessly if her best friend had done such a thing. But these were just ladies from around town, probably jealous of her. That was much more feasible than what Sean had said, she thought. She had never been told she was selfish before. Sean was the only one. Anna imagined, if she told Ethel that Sean had said such a thing, her friend would be completely outraged by the accusation. She closed her eyes and dreamed of the day she would be married, hoping that once the ceremony was over with, everything would calm down, and Sean would be the perfect husband for her. She refused to believe it would be anything other than a dream come true. Chapter 3. It was Anna's big day. She had woken up early, cleaned herself and gone to the church where the wedding would be held. She wanted to get a sneak peek at everything her future mother-in-law had planned. She felt a little overwhelmed when she walked inside and saw the luxury all around her. There were streamers and flowers everywhere. The ceiling was filled with balloons. Candles were lit in every sconce hanging on the walls. The place was adorned beautifully. It took Anna's breath away. She looked for Caroline, but didn't see her anywhere. The best thing she could do, she thought, was go to the room designated for her to get ready. Her friends would be in around 8 to help her get dressed. Anna walked down the middle aisle of the church, thinking about how she would be repeating the motion that afternoon. Today was the last day she would spend as an unmarried woman. Tomorrow, her new life would begin. Her heart thumped in her chest as she went through a door on the other side of the church and into a small hallway that led to the rest of the rooms. She knew which one was hers. It was the one closest to the outside door where she would go to get to the front of the church when the ceremony started. Anna rested her hand on the doorknob, but hesitated before turning it. This was a big step for her. Today was a day like no other. She would never have a luxurious wedding like this again. She intended to make the most of her day. She entered the room, her eyes immediately falling on the dress hanging alone from a rack. There was another rack beside it with the dresses her matron of honor and her 3 bridesmaids would wear. Anna went to the rack with the bridal gown and took it in both hands. She held it up, gazing at the perfectly placed pearls and lace around the bodice, the high neckline, the low hemline. The veil was on a hook nearby, the train hanging down and circling on the floor. It was 10 feet long. Anna shook her head, amazed by the beauty of it all. She turned to look at the rack of bridesmaids' dresses, and something caught her eye. She approached the rack and moved the hangers from side to side. There were 3 more dresses there than necessary. Anna had 3 bridesmaids and Ethel. There were 7 dresses hanging on the rack, all of them identical except Ethel's. Hers had gold buttons in a line down the front that stopped at the waist and spread around like a belt. Anna's eyebrows drew together, wondering what the extra dresses were for. She heard a door open and close, and knew people were going to start coming in soon. She didn't expect her friends for at least another hour. She turned back to the rack with her dress on it. It would take some time getting into if she did it alone. But she was anxious and wanted to know if it looked as beautiful on her now, 6 weeks after she purchased it, as it had the last time she tried it on. She hadn't gained or lost weight. It had been perfectly tailored to fit her body. They'd taken her measurements and everything. Biting her bottom lip, she took the dress from the hanger and changed into it. She took her time, moving carefully so nothing would rip, making sure she had on the underclothes she needed for such a magnificent gown. When she had it on, and had managed to button up the back all the way to her neck with only one button unreached in the very middle of the line, she stood in front of the mirror and gazed at herself. "Ethel will get that last button for me," she murmured, her eyes shining with tears as she stared at herself in the dress. It was the most gorgeous piece of clothing she had ever seen and would ever wear. "I look magnificent," she whispered, a tear spilling from her eye. "Thank you, Lord." She glanced heavenward, her prayer short and to the point. A glance at the clock told her it was nearly time for her friends to arrive. She heard the outside door open and close, and someone knocked on the door of her room. Her heart did a flip in her chest, and her breath caught in her throat. It was starting. All of the action was about to take place. Her wedding was in full swing, and she would soon be Mrs. Sean Arthur Douglas. She couldn't wait. She crossed the room, holding up the low skirt with one hand so it wouldn't drag. She opened the door with a big smile on her face, anxious to see if it was Ethel who had shown up early. Anna froze in place, her smile unwavering for a moment as she stared into the face of Nan Bundle. She frowned in confusion, tilting her head to the side. Nan was not in her bridal party. "Nan? What's going on? Is everything okay?" Nan grinned, put up one hand and pushed her aside, stepping into the room. Anna's heart dropped. The woman had not come to give her well wishes. Of that Anna was certain. "What are you doing here, Nan?" Nan turned her head to Anna, her brown eyes moving from Anna's neck to her feet and back up. She sneered. "Already got the dress on, do ya? You know I feel sorry for women like you. You never know anything. You have to be smacked upside the face to actually understand anything." Anna's chest tightened. She stared at Nan. "What are you talking about? Why are you here? Ethel will be here soon, you know. You have no need to be here. I'm getting married today, and—" "You aren't getting married today," Nan said in a cold voice, her face amused but in an unkind way. Anna's breath became rapid and shaky. Fear sliced through her. "In fact, I doubt you will ever get married." Nan came close to her, and stopped only when she was a foot away. Anna didn't like having the woman so close, so she moved back a step or two. Nan closed that distance too, and Anna kept moving until her back was pressed against the door. She lowered her head, turning it away from Nan and her bitter, evil expression. "You know why you'll never get married?" Nan hissed, getting up in Anna's face. "Because you're a weak little mouse who thinks everyone should cater to her. You think you're something special, don't you? Well, I have news for you. There's nothing special about you. And your little Ethel Tart isn't coming to rescue you. She won't be wearing a dress today either." Anna turned glaring eyes up to Nan. "What are you talking about?" She felt the hair on her arms and neck stand on end as anger coursed through her. "What have you done?" Nan snorted. "It's not what I've done that matters. It's Sean that matters, right? Isn't it Sean that matters?" Anna felt a warmth spread through her when she thought about Sean. He was so handsome, so smart. She cared for him despite his rare insults and accusations. She loved him for who he was when he was with her. "You're still not making any sense to me," Anna said, shaking her head. "Why don't you just go? You're not invited to my wedding anymore." This time Nan laughed out loud, throwing her head back. Anna thought she'd never heard a more evil laugh in all her life. "I said you aren't getting married, Anna." She said Anna's name with disgust in her voice. "You want proof? Here you go. From your beloved Sean." Anna didn't like the look on Nan's face when she pulled a folded note from the bodice of her dress and handed it over. Anna took it with apprehension. She unfolded it and read the words that plunged a hot, sharp knife into her chest and through her heart. "Anna, I'm not marrying you. Maybe I should have told you before, but I'm in love with Nan. We are the ones getting married today. Not you and I. Give the wedding dress to Nan and leave. It's probably best you don't show your face around town for a few months. Maybe longer. You will only be humiliated, and that won't do you any good. Sean." Anna stared at the note, reading it 3 times and still not believing what she was seeing. "This isn't real," she said conclusively. "You wrote this. You made this up. Why would you do such a cruel thing? Leave immediately." Nan gave her a sarcastic look, scrunching her nose as if she'd smelled something terrible. "That's Sean's handwriting and you know it. I didn't make it up. You know that too. Take off the dress. You aren't getting married. That's my dress you're wearing, and I want you to take it off right now." Anna felt like she'd been punched in the gut. She refused to cry in front of Nan. That would be saved for later. Right now, she didn't feel like mourning. She felt like knocking Nan to the ground and pounding her into sand. But instead, she lifted her chin in the air and looked disdainfully at the woman in front of her. "This is my dress and I'm not taking it off. It wouldn't fit you anyway." She looked Nan up and down with scorn in her eyes. "You're much too fat." "That's because I'm carrying his baby." Nan delivered the words with a sneer. Anna gasped. Her body turned cold, like she'd been dipped in a freezing river. She turned on her heel and left, struggling to see through tears of betrayal.
Chapter 4. So what did you think of all that? Emma asked Daniel, who was seated next to her at the table in the lawyer's office. Daniel gave her a side glance. "You know what I think. Every single one of them was as fake as they could be. I don't know why they bothered to keep up pretenses. Everyone knows Clarence was not a nice man. Emma was the youngest and sweetest of his sisters. But even she knew a scoundrel when she saw one. And that was probably because of Uncle Clarence. She had a great model to look at when it came to unkind men. Rose was the sensible one of his 3 sisters. She looked at nearly everything the same way he did, though she was 2 years younger. She hadn't bothered with any of it. The look on her face was all that was needed to know she was not a fan of her late uncle. Amelia was 26, 1 year younger than Daniel. She was a fiery girl with a mouth that sometimes wouldn't stop. She was sensible enough to know when some things were inappropriate. But if anyone had gotten in trouble as a youngster, it was her. She was mischievous and fearless. Daniel often wondered what she would do with her life, when she was obviously not to be satisfied as a wife and mother alone. She would need adventure and fun. Daniel figured she would someday travel the world, just to have that sense of freedom. I don't know why they bothered either, Amelia spoke up, the look of disdain still on her face. I doubt he left us anything in the will. He has to have, Emma pointed out. He was our benefactor, but he was giving us our parents' money. It wasn't his to give to anyone else. Daniel knew his sister was right. Unfortunately, he also knew Clarence was the kind of man who went around the law when he could. When it came to dealing with money and his particular dislike of the West children, Daniel was a bit fearful of what would be in the will. He decided not to say anything to his sisters at that time, because he didn't know what he could say to them that didn't sound negative. He hated being negative around them. His distant cousin, Edward, 3 loyal and lifelong servants, and the lawyer Aaron Stowes came through the door one right after another. Daniel watched them file in. They were so quiet, as if they were still at the funeral. Aaron was the only one who wasn't moving slowly and silently. He walked confidently to the head of the table and slapped a folder down on top of it. He pulled a pair of wire-rimmed glasses from his breast pocket, but scanned everyone before he put them on. Looks like we are all here, he said, nodding at them. He put the glasses on and sat down. From that moment on, whenever he looked at anyone, it was over the top of his glasses, which were pushed nearly to the end of his long, sharp nose. Are we ready for this? Daniel nodded, prompting his sisters to do the same. Aaron opened the folder and shifted in his seat, reading through it as if he hadn't seen it before. After a moment or two, he cleared his throat and began. Most of the will was standard. He'd left some to a charitable organization for aspiring artists. He'd left a nice sum to Edward and the 3 loyal servants. There was another employee he wished to honor who wasn't there but would receive a nice stipend. The house and everything in it were to be sold without hesitation. Can we go get anything out of the house? Daniel asked. Aaron gave him an inquisitive look. Why would you want anything from your uncle's house? It is well known you did not get along with him. He had some things that belonged to our parents. Daniel moved his finger to indicate himself and his sisters. I think we're entitled to get those things back. Oh, I see, Aaron nodded. Daniel was immediately grateful that the lawyer didn't seem to dislike him the same way his uncle had. He wondered for a moment if Aaron was glad to be rid of one obnoxious client. He had to keep himself from smiling. In that case, if you would like to make a list of what's yours, I will pass it on to the estate manager, and they will remove those items. I'll have them sent to you. That won't work, Daniel said firmly. There are things we don't remember, because it's been 10 years since the passing of our parents. We need to be able to go through and pick out what belonged to our parents by sight, not by memory. Aaron stared at Daniel for a moment. Daniel was being completely honest. It wasn't that he and his sisters wanted to steal from their late uncle. They just wanted back what originally belonged to them. Daniel could think of 3 paintings in particular that he wanted back. They'd hung in his room when he was growing up, and he'd missed the comfort they gave him ever since his uncle took almost everything from them right after their parents' funeral. I don't have a problem with you and your sisters going to the mansion to see what is yours and what isn't, Aaron finally said, relieving some of Daniel's tension. He looked at the other 4 people in the room. Please see my secretary upon leaving. She will have a check for you in the amount Clarence left to you. The rest of this will concern the West siblings alone. Thank you for coming. The cousin and the servants left quietly, nodding, happy looks on their satisfied faces. Daniel felt a nervous tension fill his chest when the door closed behind them. He had a feeling something was about to happen that he wasn't going to like. Aaron licked his lips and pulled in a deep breath, his eyes on Daniel and the girls. All right, this is what has been left to you 4, Aaron started, putting a specific piece of paper on top of the small stack in front of him. You 3 girls get a set sum of $3,000. Daniel, you will receive $5,000. Daniel looked at his sisters. The money they'd been left wasn't nearly enough to live on or to keep up with their parents' estate. It was a surprisingly small amount of money. His sisters all gasped. Emma covered her mouth. They looked terrified, and that scared Daniel. He leaned forward in his chair. There must be more. He was relieved when Aaron nodded. The look on Aaron's face, however, didn't make Daniel feel much more comfortable. There is more, yes. The entire estate, the bulk of the remaining assets, and after the sale of the house and whatever is left in it by you and your sisters, will come to you, Daniel. Relief swept through Daniel, and he sucked in a sharp breath, closing his eyes. He relaxed his shoulders and gave Aaron a grateful look. When Aaron pressed his lips together, Daniel knew the lawyer wasn't finished and was immediately tense again. "What is it?" he asked nervously. Aaron hesitated, but only for a moment. It seemed when he spoke, he wanted to get it out quickly. "You have to get married." Daniel frowned. "What?" "You have to get married by your next birthday." Daniel let out a disgusted sound. "That's 2 months away. I can't find a woman to marry in 2 months. What is this all about?" Aaron looked regretful, and sounded the same when he answered Daniel. "Every year since you turned 21, Clarence has been revising his will 4 months before your next birthday. Every year he's changed it so that you would have a short amount of time to get married. If you don't get married within that time, all of the money reverts to the charity for artists." Daniel felt sick to his stomach. He was a confirmed bachelor because he had 3 sisters to take care of and didn't feel the need to bring in a 4th woman. But how am I supposed to find a bride in 2 months? That's not enough time to do anything. Not even plan a wedding, much less find a woman to be the bride. Aaron gave him a reluctant look. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I can't change anything about this will. For years, I've been fussing at him for doing this to you. But it's the only way you can keep the money, and once it's done, you'll have it all. He won't have any more control." Resentment slid through Daniel, leaving him fuming. He felt like he would never escape his uncle's curse. Even in death, his uncle continued to torment him. Now he would have to not only share the fortune with a strange woman, he would have to marry her and give her his name and trust her. There was no one in Boone's Gulch he really trusted other than his sisters. None of the women were interesting to him. There weren't many of them to begin with. Most were already married or courting. Daniel didn't want his anger to scare his sisters. He pushed it down and agreed to the terms of the will, not that he had a choice. Now all he had to do was find a woman to marry. Chapter 5. The ride home was not pleasant for Daniel. His sisters were worried about him, probably more worried than he was about himself. "I think it's outrageous that Uncle Clarence did this," Emma said, her normally sweet voice full of anger. "He is such a mean man." "Was," Amelia stated firmly. "He was a mean man. He won't have control over us anymore. All we have to do is find a bride for Daniel." All 3 sisters looked at him. He could see Emma, who was sitting beside him, and feel the eyes of Rose and Amelia, who were in the back seat. "Don't look at me like that," he said, without turning his eyes from the road in front of him. "I don't know any women that want to marry me. I'm not even seeing anyone socially right now, much less courting and on the way to marriage. 2 months isn't enough time. There's no way I can do it." "It's too bad one of us can't marry you," Emma said quietly. Daniel's eyes darted to her face and he recoiled gently. "What a thought," he said. "Spending the entire first half of my life with you 3, and then having to spend the rest of it with you 2. No thanks." He and his sisters laughed, while Amelia and Rose chided Emma for saying something so silly. She laughed with them, shaking her head. "I was only joking, come on now," she said. "I think I might have a solution though, Daniel," Amelia said, sitting forward and grabbing his shoulder. "Stop up here at that stand right there." Daniel moved his eyes to the side of the road, and caught sight of a newspaper and magazine stand. "You mean that one there?" "Yes. I need to look at something." As soon as the buggy came to a stop, Emilia jumped down and jogged to the stand. She conversed with the bespectacled man selling them. After a brief conversation, the man started to nod and moved to a rack on his stand, picking up one of the magazines. Daniel couldn't see what it was. He waited until she paid and came back to the buggy to inquire. "What is that magazine? What are you getting me into?" Emilia laughed, pulling herself up in the buggy and handing the magazine to him over his shoulder. Daniel got one look at the title of the magazine and his heart sank. "Oh no," he said. "You can't expect me to go through with this. I'd be marrying a stranger." Emilia raised her eyebrows. At this point, whether you met her through matrimonial times or a party at a friend's house, she'd be a stranger. And you only have 2 months. Take some of that $5,000 and put an ad in there. I'm sure you will find a good match. Lots of good wives have been found this way, you know. Daniel turned in the seat and gazed at his sister. "And you know this how?" Emilia grinned wide. "Turn to the last few pages. Look at those testimonials." Daniel did as his sister suggested, scanning down the 3 pages at the letters from men who had successfully found a good wife out of a match from the newspaper. He sighed. "I don't see how I have any choice. Let's go home and you 3 can help me think up a good letter to charm some unwitting stranger to join this crazy family of ours." "I think any woman that marries you will be a lucky woman, Daniel," Emma said, a big smile on her young face. "That's awful nice for you to say, Emma," Daniel replied, slapping the reins to get the horses moving. "Thank you." Emma reached over and squeezed his arm affectionately. "And any girl you like we will like too. I just know it." "I hope so," he said. "Because it will be deal-breaker if one of you 3 thinks there's a problem that can't be resolved. I'm not living with a woman who alienates my sisters." As they rode back to their large house, Daniel listened to his sisters chattering away like schoolgirls. He was blessed to have 3 sisters who got along as well as his did. He would give his life for any of them, and he knew they felt the same way about him. Since the death of their parents when they were in their teens, the girls had relied on him to keep them together and sane. Their uncle's treatment didn't help matters though, it did serve to test and strengthen the siblings' loyalty to one another. He put the buggy away and took care of the horses before he went inside. The foyer was clean as a whistle, and fresh flowers had been put in the vase that sat on the antique marble stand in the middle of the room. The floors were polished to a shine, and when he walked in, his footsteps boomed as if he were stomping. He was followed in by his sisters, who didn't notice the cleanliness or the new flowers at all. They stripped off their jackets, which they gave to Bettina, their housekeeper, who suddenly appeared through a doorway. "Lovely to see you, Emilia," she said, taking the coat from the young woman. "I do hope all went well at the lawyer's office." Emilia grabbed Bettina's hand and looked the woman right in the eyes. "It could have been better, Bettina. I'm telling you, if it wasn't for Daniel's confidence, we'd all be a wreck right now." She rolled her eyes dramatically, shaking her head. Bettina looked amused, looking to Daniel, who gave her a half grin. She smiled in response, as Emma was the next to grab the housekeeper's attention. "Our lawyer was good though. He sent the rest of them out before he told us the terms that had anything to do with us. It was none of their business, you see. And we don't want just any old body knowing our business, now do we?" Daniel held back a snort. They were telling the housekeeper, a woman Daniel highly respected, but was well known for being a gossip. If they didn't want anyone to know the terms of the will, his sisters were telling the wrong person. He also knew that if Bettina did tell anyone, it would be with good faith, words that didn't attack the West siblings, but would more likely convey concern and outrage at what happened to them. The housekeeper continued gathering their jackets, getting to Daniel last. "I am sorry things didn't go well for you today, sir." Daniel shook his head, handing his jacket and hat to her. "It's not as bad as my sisters make it out to be, Bettina," he replied. "Nothing I can't handle." She nodded at him. "That's good to hear." With that, she turned and went into the mudroom and closet area to hang their jackets. The girls all removed their shoes as they walked to the den. Daniel wished he could do the same, but he didn't feel right walking around the house in his socks. His sisters all wore stockings and looked lovely without shoes. He would look like a nincompoop. And a lazy one at that, if he had on a sock he'd neglected to have darn to mend a hole. Rose turned from the door of the den, blocking it so her sisters couldn't go through. They, along with Daniel, gave her strange looks. "What are you doing, Rose?" Amelia asked, curiously. "Are you charging a toll to get in the living room now?" Rose giggled. "Let go in the game room and use one of the card tables so we can write this letter for Daniel. I think it's exciting, don't you?" Amelia shrugged. "I suppose it is a little exciting. And I don't see why we can't use one of the card tables. That's probably the most convenient place to do it." Daniel nodded. "I agree, little sister. Let's go in the game room. You three go in and set up a table, and I'll get the notepaper from the study." He parted from them and went to the study to retrieve the writing supplies. He walked in the room and was hit with a sense of nostalgia like never before. This was his father's study. He remembered coming in as a child and running to his father to climb on his lap and be read to or told a story. He went to the desk and pulled open a drawer. He took out a small notepad and opened the middle drawer to find a pen. As he closed the door, he looked up and movement outside the window caught his eye. He went to the window and peered through to the grounds outside, where rolling hills of green and a smattering of trees and bushes make a picturesque scene. He watched as two deer leapt away from him, as if they'd seen something that frightened them. It couldn't be him. They couldn't see him from where they were, and his movement wouldn't have alarmed them. Seeing nothing else, Daniel took one last look at the landscape, sure that any woman he brought there from the east would love it as much as he did. They'd have to have a cold heart not to.
Chapter 6. Anna felt sick to her stomach. For the first time since she'd been booted from her own wedding a week ago, she'd ventured into town to get some new ribbons for a dress she was making. As soon as she stepped down from her horse and walked up on the sidewalk to go in the general store, she knew she'd made a mistake in her timing. Nan and several other young ladies were inside, moving through the aisles, laughing. They weren't laughing at her, or at least Anna didn't think so. Unless they were still laughing at her humiliation from the week before. She'd had time to think about it, and the more she did, the angrier she grew. Nan and her circle of friends had come to her bridal shower. They had eaten and drank at her expense. They were laughing and talking behind her back. And now they felt free to do it in front of her face. She wasn't in the least forgiving of Sean, who had tried to apologize in a hand-delivered message 3 days after their wedding flop. By that time, he had married Nan, and they were preparing to leave the country on a grand honeymoon in Europe. Anna only knew this because of Ethel, who'd had a brutal awakening of her own when she showed up to the church a week ago to be told she wouldn't be a matron of honor for anyone that day. Ethel had kept her ear to the ground, listening for anything that had to do with Sean and Nan, and reporting it back to Anna. Anna didn't want the girls to see her. She wasn't going in that store as long as they were in there. She turned and hurried away so they wouldn't spot her through the windows. She didn't want them laughing right in her face, and she knew full well that's what they would do. With a great sigh of relief, Anna noticed Ethel in the restaurant with her younger brother Jeremiah, who was just a teenager. She went quickly to the door, scanned the place for any other potential hecklers, and seeing none, went in. Ethel looked up just as she was approaching the table. A large smile covered her face. "Hello there, Anna." She jumped to her feet and pulled Anna into a tight hug. "How are you? How are you feeling?" She looked around as if people might be watching them. "I've been keeping an ear out and defending you every chance I get, honey. Don't you worry. Everyone in town will know what Nan did to you." Anna gave her friend a hug and smiled as she replied, "I know you have. I'm surprised everyone who attended the wedding doesn't know, though." A look of utter disgust crossed Ethel's face. Anna raised her eyebrows when the girl said, "They changed the narrative. They said it was you who called it off, running away from Sean right before the wedding. Said it was only a lucky thing that Nan and Sean had grown so close." She told everyone afterward that she had been consoling Sean for months because he was worried you were straying or pulling away from him. She said he didn't believe you loved him anymore, and you were only using him to get the money. Anna scowled. That's ridiculous. If I were only using him to get his money, I wouldn't have dropped him the day of my wedding. Ethel nodded. There has been some talk about the unlikelihood of Nan's story being true. But most people don't want to get involved, especially in that family. Caroline's behind it all anyway, Jeremiah said, looking up from the book he'd had his nose buried in. Anna turned her gaze to him. Hello there, Jeremiah. Thought you were lost in another world. He lifted the book, smiling. Yes, it's a good one. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Riveting, I'd say. But yes, if you're looking for someone to blame for the whole fiasco, you'd want to look at Caroline. You're talking about Sean's mother? Anna asked. Jeremiah nodded. Isn't it kind of disrespectful to call her by her first name? She continued, surprised by his lack of respect. He wasn't the kind of young man to shirk that responsibility. Not her, he responded. I have no respect for her. Neither do my friends. And one of those friends is Sean's brother Andrew. You know him? Anna nodded. Of course. Well, he's in my grade at the schoolhouse, so we do a lot of work together. He's the only other one in the grade. And he's been keeping me apprised of the situation for months. Ethel tilted her head at Jeremiah, a reproachful look on her face. And you didn't bother to say anything to me or Anna. Isn't she your friend? I'm your sister. How could you not have said anything about this to me before? Jeremiah's expression turned to one of regret. He looked at Anna. I didn't mean to keep information from you, he said quickly. I really didn't believe Andrew when he was telling me this stuff. I was half listening as it was. I mean, you are my friend, Anna, but I wasn't involved in the wedding in any way other than listening to Andrew ramble on about it. So he didn't like what he was seeing, and he told you about it, but you weren't really listening and only caught half of what he was saying, Anna said as a recap. Jeremiah nodded. Yes, that's it exactly. I didn't even think about any of it until you came home crying that day, Ethel. Anna hadn't heard about that before. She hadn't heard anything about anything for the last week, other than what Ethel had told her, and she'd left that part out. Ethel's eyes darted to Anna and she looked ashamed. Anna also hadn't shared about Nan carrying Sean's child. She hardly wanted to believe it herself. Perhaps Nan was lying about it. Either way, she would not be pulled back into that fiasco, and she would never discuss the details with anyone. She swore to herself she wouldn't. Plus, she didn't want to cast aspersions on a baby's life. She'd rise above that. She'd be better than Nan or Sean. She pulled herself from those thoughts. I did cry that day, didn't I? She tried to give a forced smile but wondered if she'd failed. Jeremiah snorted. Yeah, that day, and for 2 days after. Ethel turned her eyes away from Anna, who was tearing up at the thought that her friend cared so much for her. I don't know what I'm going to do now, she said breathlessly, leaning forward and resting her forehead in her hands. I don't want to be here anymore, I'll be very honest with you. Have you talked to your aunt and uncle about it? Ethel asked. Not yet. She looked up from her hands at Jeremiah. What makes you, or Andrew, say that it was Caroline who was behind it all and not Nan or Sean? Oh, they were definitely behind it too, Jeremiah said, his open disdain for those mentioned clear in his voice. They all planned it. But I don't understand. Anna's mind was shocked at the thought that Sean could string her along for months. Why didn't he just break it off with me? Why would he want to create the maximum amount of pain and humiliation for me? Jeremiah narrowed his eyes. From what I've gathered, he's kind of a heartless scoundrel, one step away from an outlaw. He's not to be trusted, that's for sure. Another thing that's for sure, his mother completely controls him. One word from her and you were out. I think she was against you all along. Anna's heart sank. She couldn't believe she'd been fooled for so long. She couldn't understand the need to create such pain for someone else. She never would have done something like that to him. She wouldn't have ever put herself in Nan's shoes either, and done that to someone else. Nan and Sean's mother certainly had pulled a fast one. "They're both cold-hearted, awful people," Ethel said. "You are a wonderful girl. You deserve better than him. Those two deserve each other, as a matter of fact. If they can be this cruel to someone else, imagine how they will be to each other. I would never be able to trust a man if I knew he'd done that to someone, even if she wasn't my friend." "She's probably blinded by his good looks and charm," Anna said almost mournfully. She had to laugh when Ethel gasped and let out a sound of disgust. "Good looks and charm? Maybe the good looks part, but charm? No, he isn't full of charm. There's something else he's full of, and I don't say those words in polite company." Anna's eyebrows shot up, and she gave Ethel an amused look. "But you do, in impolite company." All three laughed. "No, I don't say them in impolite company," Ethel confirmed. "I just think them, and only when it's absolutely necessary to my opinion. And my opinion of them is that they are two huge piles of stinking manure. That's exactly what they are." Again, Anna and Jeremiah laughed. Ethel grinned with satisfaction that she'd made her hurting friend feel a little better. And Anna did feel better. Ethel would be the one person she would miss the most in Lerner. She'd already made up her mind she wasn't staying. Now it was only a matter of figuring out how to get away. "I'm looking for a way out of Lerner," she told them both when the laughter died down. "I can't show my face here anymore. I have no money, and I'm not about to go begging for a job after what happened. But I don't know how I'm going to leave. I feel like I don't have any options." "You have options," it was Jeremiah who spoke. The two women looked at him. "Why don't you answer an advertisement and be the bride of a wealthy man out west? Marry a stranger?" Anna asked incredulously. "Sure," Jeremiah answered, shrugging. "You thought you knew Sean really well, didn't you? And look how that turned out."
Chapter 7. "So what's the deal?" Daniel asked, dropping into the chair on the other side of Aaron's desk. "What am I supposed to do? What are the rules and regulations? I'm sure my uncle put it pretty plainly, didn't he?" "There really aren't many restrictions that I can mention," Aaron responded, picking up the folder in front of him and tossing it across the desk to land in front of Daniel. Daniel pointed at himself and then the folder. Aaron nodded. Daniel leaned forward and picked up the folder. He opened it and scanned the papers inside. "I'm not a lawyer, Aaron," he said, sitting back in the chair. He continued looking through the documents, even though he only understood a fraction of it. His education hadn't been in law. He was more interested in inventions, engineering, and making everyday life easier and happier for the average citizen. His knack for creativity and inventing useful products had been another thing Uncle Clarence had resented. He'd tried telling Daniel whatever he thought of was useless if Daniel ever brought anything to him. But Daniel wasn't about to let the bitter man make him change his goals for the future. Someday, he would invent something that would change life on Earth for the better. He knew it. "It basically says what I told you at the reading, Daniel," Aaron said, holding out his hand. Daniel gave him back the folder, closing it as he did so. "You have to get married before your next birthday. I actually drew up this amendment just a few months ago." He always made sure of it. "Every year. Since you turned 21. What exactly was he hoping to gain by this?" Daniel asked, shaking his head. He couldn't remember having any outright arguments with the man. He didn't understand what Clarence held against him. Aaron leaned forward, a look on his face that captured Daniel's interest. It looked like he was about to say something Daniel wanted to hear. Daniel himself sat forward, folding one hand over the other, and holding them both in front of his mouth, his eyes directly on the lawyer. "I'll tell you what I think. And this isn't from the horse's mouth, But it might as well be because this opinion was formed based on things he said to me over drinks and cigars. He was a frustrated man, you know. Frustrated by many things in his life that made him unhappy. He was never married, as you know. And your father, his brother, having a beautiful, loving wife and children. Aaron shook his head, a reluctant look on his face. He was a very jealous man. Do you know that for a time after your parents' deaths, that I thought he might have been responsible for it? I wouldn't have put it past him. Daniel narrowed his eyes. It was the first time he'd ever heard such things about Clarence. He knew he didn't personally like him. But no one had ever confided their opinions on the man, so he had no idea his uncle was so disliked. Did you do anything about it? Aaron shrugged. What could I do? I wasn't in control of the money. The law did an investigation of the murders, and no link was ever found to Clarence. If there had been, there's no way he would have been legally allowed to take care of you and your sisters. He never wanted to do anything useful for any of you. Especially you, with your gambling problems. Aaron said the last two words in such a way that Daniel instantly knew the lawyer didn't believe he had any gambling problems at all. Daniel dropped his eyes to the floor and bit his lips together. You knew, didn't you? He asked. Yeah, I knew. I knew your mother and father, and there's no way any child of theirs would have a problem like that. Surely you jest. There are plenty of children of good parents who turn to evil. Cain, for instance. Aaron chuckled. You're reaching pretty far in the past for that analogy, but you're right. You're right, but... He lifted one finger in the air. Not the children of Adelaide and Conrad West. Your parents were unique. They were good friends of mine, both of them. I attended their wedding, and they attended mine. I watched you and your sisters grow up. Your mother glowed when she was pregnant, all 4 times. When the lawyer smiled wide, Daniel felt a warmth of affection for the man sweep over him. It was unexpected, and he didn't know how to feel about the newfound friendship he felt with the man sitting across the desk from him. I didn't know you knew them that well, he said. That's really interesting. I'd love to hear some of your stories about them. Aaron's eyes were warm when they looked at Daniel. I'd love that. How about you and your sisters come over for dinner, and we'll regale you with funny stories about them when they were young. I'm sure your sisters would love to hear them too. Daniel smiled. Yes. I know they would. Thank you for the invitation. Aaron nodded, pulling a pad of paper closer to him and making a quick note before pushing the pad away. I'll talk to Linda about it tonight and get back to you. Now, as far as your getting married, what have you thought about? I was wondering about restrictions, Daniel said, because I'm thinking about getting a bride from the Matrimonial Times. If Clarence put any restrictions on there about how long we'd have to court or anything like that, I'd be completely out of luck. Aaron gave Daniel a look of appreciation that Daniel didn't understand until the lawyer said, That's good thinking on your part, Daniel. As a matter of fact, he did think of several restrictions that would have made it impossible for you to get the inheritance. Fortunately, you had me on your side. There was no way I would draw up a will that made it impossible. At one point, he wanted to make it a requirement that you court for a year. That would have rendered them married by your next birthday completely null and void, and the contract would have been a dud. Daniel snorted. You should have let him put a clause like that in, so the whole thing would have been void. Then I wouldn't have had to get married. With his estate being controlled by the state, yes, you would have gotten it all. But no one else would have. I would have shared with my sisters, Daniel said defensively. The lawyer held up one hand. Of that I have no doubt. I'm saying that Edward and the servants and the charity would have gotten nothing. They were given generous amounts. I'm not sure you would have known who should get any of Clarence's money. Either way, I saw that it would make it impossible for you and stopped him from doing it. That can't be undone now. Daniel shook his head. No, it can't be, and I want you to know I'm grateful, my sisters are too, for everything you've done for us. I'm sure they would love to come to your home for dinner. We are available every night, barring illness. Aaron nodded. I look forward to it. So what is your next step? I'm going to the post office with this. He pulled a long envelope out of his inside breast pocket and flapped it in the air. My sisters and I stayed up late writing this. They wanted it to be the perfect advert that would draw attention. Aaron leaned forward. May I read it? Sure. Daniel tossed the envelope to the man, who unflapped the envelope and pulled out the tri-folded paper. He unfolded it and read the contents of the letter. When he was done, he folded it again and handed it back. I hope that works for you, Daniel. I really do. It sounds good. I don't know much about that kind of stuff, but I reckon if I were a young lady, I might be attracted to a wealthy man about to embark on a new adventure of his own. Daniel grinned. That's how that came off to you? Aaron nodded. Wasn't that your intention? Daniel nodded back. I'm glad you caught on. That means that any intelligent young woman looking for an exciting life with a newly well-off future husband will probably think that too. I wish you the very best of luck, my friend, Aaron said, standing up and leaning over the table with his hand extended. I'll send a message your way after I've talked to the missus, and we'll all get together for a lovely dinner. How does that sound? That sounds wonderful. Thank you, Aaron. You've been such a great help to us.
Chapter 8. Anna was sitting in the living room with Abby when there was a knock on the door. Abby looked up from her embroidery. Are you expecting someone? She asked. Anna shook her head. No, but it might be Ethel. She said she would come by sometime today. She wanted to pick something up first. Anna was nervous. She knew exactly what Ethel had picked up and was bringing over. It was a copy of the Matrimonial Times. She was expected to find a good man in that magazine, just from a couple lines in print. How was she supposed to know who was genuine and who wasn't? She went to the front door and pulled it open to see she was right. Ethel was smiling wide, holding up the latest copy of Matrimonial Times in both hands in front of her. She was practically hopping in place, her face exploding with excitement. I've got it, she sang out the words as she passed Anna to come in the house. I can't wait to see what kind of man you find. I'm sure he's going to love you. She spun around and glared at Anna, a sudden opposition in attitude. But I'm going to miss you so much. I can't believe you're leaving me. She laughed abruptly, shaking her head. And yet, I'd never stop you from finding happiness. Come on. Where are we going through this? In the living room? Anna shook her head. She was barely able to keep up with her excited friend. She held out her hand in the direction of the library. Let's go in the library. It's the room my uncle uses for his study, so that's where paper and pen will be. You know, so we can write to whoever you choose. Oh no, Ethel said in a teasing way. I'm not picking the man you're going to marry. That's going to be all you, dear. You know what you want, don't you? I do. Anna looked up. Well, sort of. Maybe I don't. I don't know. Ethel laughed delightedly. You silly girl. Come on then, if we're going in the library. I'm going for a cup of cocoa first, though. It's chilly today. Do you want one? Ethel's eyes widened. Oh, that sounds lovely, yes. Thank you. I'll go in the library and find a good place for us to sit so we can look through the magazine. Anna nodded. Sounds great. You'll probably have someone picked out for me if I take enough time. Don't you do that, Ethel scolded good-naturedly. But I might have one or two circled. Where's the pens in there? Where's the pens? Anna said with a laugh. The pens are in any desk that's in there. I think there's 2 desks and a table with drawers. Any of them. Ethel laughed and swatted playfully at her friend. Yes, teacher. I'll see you in there. She turned away and hurried to the library door. Once she turned away, Anna went back to the living room to tell her aunt she would be in the study, and that it was Ethel at the door. Then she went into the kitchen and began preparing the hot cocoa. She truly did take her time because she knew the longer she made Ethel wait, the more magazine her friend would go through. It would help on elimination for her, because Ethel would have most of the magazines circled or crossed out as appropriate. Anna stared down at the liquid, waiting for it to reach a soft boil. She'd never looked in one of those magazines before. She'd never even had a need. It was a wonder she even knew what it was. The only reason she did was because she had met a few acquaintances who had left for the West Coast for that very reason. She'd never heard another word from them, but she'd gotten accounts from mutual friends and family that gave her the impression her friends were very happy with their situations. Her stomach twisted with nervousness as she thought about leaving her aunt and uncle's home, what she'd grown so accustomed to over the years. It was her home too, and she loved her aunt and uncle. But she was 23, and it was time to cut the strings. She needed to be her own woman. It wasn't until Sean did what he had that Anna realized she'd been relying on someone else her entire life. This was a decision she was going to make for herself. It was going to propel her into the maturity she lacked. She was sure of it. She would finally grow up, and even after being married to a rich man out west, which was her goal, she was going to remain independent. She wouldn't fall for any of his tricks or words of love and passion. She wouldn't be fooled twice. The man she chose didn't have to be a poet or a bard. She wasn't looking for someone to shine a light on all her attributes while ignoring her needs and desires. She wanted a husband who would respect her wishes and truly be loyal and trustworthy. Anna doubted she would find a man like that. She hoped she would. But her doubts weighed heavy on her mind. When the cocoa was ready, she poured 2 cups and took them to the library. She had stalled long enough for Ethel to have gone through half of the magazine. "So who have you chosen for me?" Anna asked, setting the cup down on the table in front of her friend. "I'm sure you must have found one already." "I've seen a few prospects, yes," Ethel said with a grin, looking up and then leaning over to take her cup in hand. She took a few sips, handing the magazine, half of it folded over, to Anna. "I also crossed out the ones that you don't need to bother to look at." Anna chuckled. "I thought you'd do that," she said. "Thank you. If you want to go through the rest of it, you'd probably make it a lot easier on me. My eyes get tired just looking at this." Ethel raised her eyebrows, holding her hand out to take the magazine back from Anna. "I don't mind," she said. "It makes me feel better knowing I'm here to help you. I'm still heartsick over what they did to you. I'm telling you, I had murder on my mind for a day or two there." Anna tilted her head to the side, giving her best friend an affectionate look. "Ah, did you really? You would have murdered for me?" Ethel snorted. "For a couple days there, I had a mind to." Anna chuckled. She couldn't picture her petite, curly brown-haired friend doing anything of the sort. "That must have been after you were done crying." Ethel shook her head. "Those days overlapped, I think." "Well, you didn't murder anyone, so let's get on with this," Anna said in a friendly tone. She sat back with her cup in one hand, waving at Ethel as if she needed to get back to the business at hand. Ethel just laughed, going back to the magazine. For the next few minutes, she flipped the pages, making X's through some of the ads and circling 2 more. "Take your time," Anna prompted with a grin. Ethel just narrowed her eyes at Anna. 10 minutes later, Ethel was handing the magazine back. "Here you go. I left some without circles or X's because I didn't know if you would find them interesting or not. Go ahead. Look through it. Tell me what you think." Anna sat forward, the magazine open on her lap. She flipped the pages, scanning through the circled ads. They all sounded friendly. They sounded like they led interesting lives. She held out her hand to Ethel, who gave over the pen as if she had read Anna's mind. Anna looked up with a grateful smile. She began crossing out the ones she wasn't interested in. Several had children that needed to be taken care of. Anna wasn't ready for that. She was 3/4 of the way through the magazine when she came to an ad that struck her immediately. She set her cup down in front of her on the table and took the magazine in both hands. It was one that Ethel had circled. The circle didn't look like the others. It was a repeated circle, as if Ethel was intrigued and didn't want Anna to miss it. She looked up at her friend, whose eyes were sparkling with excitement. "I was hoping that one would catch your eye," she said. Anna read through it again. Utah bachelor seeking bride from the east. Must expect to gain 3 sisters as well. Must be friendly, intelligent, and compassionate. Must be ready for adventure and fun. Do not respond if you tend to frown a lot. Contact magazine for information. Anna let out a small laugh. She read it aloud in an incredulous voice. She looked up to see Ethel beaming at her. "He sounds wonderful, doesn't he?" Anna looked down again. It was intriguing. "Yes," she responded, smiling back at her friend. "He sounds perfect." Chapter 9. Anna didn't even want to go in town to the post office, though she was expecting a reply from Daniel West. She'd been thinking about it ever since she sent that first letter. She hoped it would be one of many. Not too many though, because she wanted to get out of Lerner as quickly as possible. She hurried to the building with her head down, unwilling to see the looks of pity on the faces of the older citizens or the disdain of the younger ones. She'd managed to get a few more people on her side through Ethel's persistence, but for the most part, she was merely pitied and shamed. She couldn't wait to get away from her hometown. Anna was ready to start fresh and new. She'd seen Sean and Nan around town together on several occasions, and had to turn around and go in the other direction, sick to her stomach. They didn't seem like they were miserable. In fact, they looked very happy, which didn't make Anna feel any better at all. She wanted to leave town, so she could imagine them arguing and breaking up from thousands of miles away, and not have the truth shoved in her face every time she went to town. She pushed open the door of the post office and went through. She was grateful to see she was the only one in the little building. She went directly to the clerk's desk and peered through the window at him. The clerk, David, was one of the few people on her side. He'd never liked Sean and had thought he was arrogant since they were all in school together. He took the time to let Anna know this after he heard what happened. Nan hadn't grown up in Lerner. She was a transplant. So she didn't get any sympathy from the clerk, a friend of Anna's named David. David smiled at her as she approached. He twisted at the waist and grabbed a letter from a box behind him to this left. "Look what came for you today, Anna," he said, excitement in his voice. "I think this is the one you've been looking for, isn't it?" Anna hurried to take the envelope and scan the return address. A tingle went through her and she looked at David, nodding. "It's exactly what I was looking for," she said, barely able to catch her breath. "Well, go on," her friend said with a laugh. "Open it. Unless you want to read it alone, in which case I understand." Anna shook her head. "No, I'll read it here. I'm sure it's a good letter. I mean, he didn't have to write back to me, did he?" David shook his head. "He sure didn't." He leaned on the counter in front of him, looking through the glass as she ripped the envelope open and set it aside. She unfolded the letter and began to read it. Daniel sounded like the perfect man, which put Anna on edge. She thought Sean was the perfect man too. Maybe her judgment was fatally flawed. Maybe she needed someone else's opinion of Daniel. She couldn't wait until she was in Boone's Gulch to ask. She had to ask people who knew her and were on her side, not Daniel's. Anna looked up at David. "Can I read this out loud? I want a second opinion. After what I went through with Sean." She didn't have to say more. David was already nodding, an understanding look on his face. "Dear Miss Anna Dawson, I was delighted to get your letter. It was one of the first, and the only one that I truly enjoyed reading. I am sorry to hear that you've been through something traumatic. I imagine you will tell me what it was in detail when you are comfortable. Please know that I am fine with that. I too find that time is not on my side. I appreciated your candor, that you are interested in leaving New York as soon as possible. Because of this need on your end and on mine, I am willing to bring you to Utah immediately, and you may stay in a room at the hotel, or in one of our guest rooms as you see fit. This is to ensure that because our correspondence has been restricted to only a few letters, we will both be able to get to know each other to see if we are compatible. As I mentioned in the advertisement, I have 3 sisters. My sisters have been my life and soul to this point, and are perfectly willing to share me with a woman who loves me. I realize this might sound like a lot to ask for this soon, but I promise you we will try if you will. I am interested in many things and enjoy life on a general basis. You will not come to Utah and find a grumpy old man, nor a grumpy young man. She looked up at David with a smile, before looking back down and continuing. Please send a letter stating what you would like to do at this point. When I receive your letter, I will either see the need to send you a train ticket or look for another bride. I do hope you will come to Utah and meet us. We were intrigued by your letter, and would like to meet you very much. I believe my sisters and I can make you forget your recent trauma, and show you that life can be happy and a lot of fun. Yours sincerely, Daniel West. Well, oh my, David said, pushing himself to an upright position. His smile was bright. I like the sound of that, young man. What are you going to do? Anna laughed. What do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to write him back and request that train ticket. I've never had a family, you know. It's always just been me and my aunt and uncle. David nodded. Yes, I know that. And this man has 3 sisters that are ready to welcome me with open arms. I'm ecstatic. I can't wait to get there and meet them all. I've got some pen and paper, if you'd like to write to him before you leave here. You can just bring the paper to me, and I'll put it in an envelope and add the addresses. Anna tilted her head to the side, giving him an affectionate look. Really, you would do that for me? I certainly would, David said. You're my friend. And when you leave for Utah, there will be a hole in Lerner that will never be filled by any other pretty little blonde woman. Ah, you are so sweet. Anna had to laugh as she took the pen and paper from him. I'll just be right over here if you need me. Take your time, Anna, David instructed. Write from the heart and you can't lose. Anna took the pen and paper to a short table nearby, with 2 chairs on either side of it. She sat in one and started writing. It didn't take her long to pen a reply to Daniel. She was anxious to go. His letter was warm and friendly. She even liked his handwriting. If she had it her way, her letter would be fast-tracked to Utah and she would be leaving on a train from Lerner in the next week. She couldn't wait. She was going home to pack immediately. She would miss her friends and aunt and uncle. But she was determined now. She had to get away from Lerner, away from the betrayal that smacked her in the face everywhere she went, away from the pain and heartache that accompanied every trip to town. Anna took the letter to David. She had to wait behind an older woman, who purchased a stamp from David and left after sticking it to the letter and handing it to him. Make sure this gets where it's supposed to go, young man, she said, tapping the envelope on the counter between them. Of course, Mrs. Haversham, David said, nodding as he pulled the envelope toward him. Mrs. Haversham left, and Anna went up to the counter. Here you go, David, she said, tapping the letter on the counter like the older woman had done. You make sure this gets to Utah. That means hand deliver, do you understand? David laughed. I know. I have no way of making sure it gets to its destination. But I'll make sure it goes in the right direction. They both laughed. When Anna left, she was about as excited as she could get. She didn't know if she could wait for the train ticket. She wanted to go now. If she had the money, she would purchase her own ticket and surprise the man and his sisters when she just showed up on their doorstep one day. There was a spring in her step as she walked to her aunt's buggy, which she'd brought to town with her but left in front of the general store. She'd seen unfriendly faces inside when she arrived in town. Now that she'd spent some time in the post office, She hoped those faces would be gone and she could get her shopping done.
Chapter 10. The train was on its way. Daniel was anxious for it, repeatedly taking his watch out of his pocket and opening it to check the time. "It's gonna be on time, Daniel," the only attendant for the small station said, eyeing him as Daniel took the watch from his pocket for the 5th time. "I'm sure it will be, Carl," Daniel replied, purposefully pulling out his watch again and flipping it open. "And it's supposed to show up at 3:10, is that right?" "Yeah, that's right." "Well, it's real slow getting to 3:10, so I'm just making sure." Daniel knew Carl was only teasing. Everyone in town knew Daniel had sent to the east for a mail-order bride. They were all rooting him on, encouraging nothing but the best for the Wests. It was their uncle who had been the one unliked by many. Not Daniel or his sisters. "I'm hopping it works out for you, really," Carl said, nodding at the young man. "You deserve it. I know that man must have been treating you horrible." "Heard some stories." Carl shook his head. "I am sorry you had to go through all that." Daniel gazed at the older man, wondering just how much Carl knew. It was probably Aaron who had filled him in. Daniel had never thought of Aaron as the gossiping type, but he did know about a poker game the lawyer had with some of his friends in town every Friday night. It was a bone of contention with the ladies, and Daniel's sisters had filled him in on the drama every time something came up and a wife was upset. They'd had many good laughs about it over dinner. 10 minutes passed and Daniel had 5 more to wait before the train would arrive. He knew Carl was right about it being on time when he saw the smoke in the distant sky and heard the loud sound on the tracks. "Here she is," Carl said, taking a few steps toward the end of the platform. Daniel did the same thing. "Anyone else coming on this train?" he asked, looking at Carl. "Just one other, I think. Here for a real estate purchase." Daniel said nothing else as the train pulled into the station. It was louder than Daniel remembered from the last time he'd picked someone up from there. It was when his sister, Rose, had come back from visiting someone she'd met at finishing school. She'd traveled to Montana to visit the young lady and stayed there to vacation for nearly 2 months. Daniel was sure she'd found a beau and would likely marry him and stay there. But she didn't. She returned in high spirits, refreshed from her vacation. That was 3 years ago. Daniel waited patiently for the train to come to a full stop. Only one of the doors opened. A young woman he had to assume was Anna stepped off. She was dressed in a long gown of what looked like a light material, a white dress with gold trimmings. Her bonnet matched, and when she stepped toward him, her hand extended, he could see she had matching boots on as well. "Hello," she said excitedly. "Are you Daniel West?" "I am," Daniel said. "Please call me Daniel." "You are Anna Dawson." "That's me," Anna said, a grin. "I'm so glad to be here. I have been wanting to leave Lerner quite badly for the past month." Daniel nodded, studying her face, looking for signs of deception. He didn't see any. She had an open, friendly smile. He could see her getting along with all 3 of his sisters, who were easy to get along with anyway. "Are you hungry? I'd love to take you for a bite to eat before we head back to the house. You can check out the hotel too. You might want to get a room there. You don't have to, mind you." He continued talking as he took her large bag from her and turned to go to the end of the platform, down to the lot where his wagon was waiting. "I've got plenty of room for you at the house. It's pretty big. My sisters and I all have our own rooms. I moved across to another one after my parents died. I didn't move into their room though. I never felt right about doing that." "I understand," Anna said, scurrying along behind him. He realized he was going too fast and slowed down to match her pace. "Sorry about that. I'm always in a hurry. My sisters tell me to slow down all the time. You can too. Just smack me on the arm and tell me. You don't have to smack too hard though." Anna laughed delightedly. He liked the sound of it. "Somehow I doubt I will be smacking you anytime soon," she said as they stepped down to the dirt lot and crossed to where the only wagon sat, Daniel's. He took her bag and slung it up into the back, then helped her up into the passenger seat. As he went around the wagon, he said, "You'll see. You'll be smacking me just as much as they do, I'm sure." Anna laughed again. Daniel smiled at her as he pulled himself up into the wagon seat. He took hold of the reins and stopped for a moment, gazing at her. "You're as I pictured you, Anna." She giggled. "You must be joking." "How could I be, other than my hair and eye color?" He shook his head, slapping the reins to get the horses going. "I don't know. I just thought you'd be small and pretty, and here you are, just like I thought you would. Obviously, I didn't have an image of you in my mind. But you are very pretty. I am happy to see that." He was hoping she would turn out to be pretty on the inside, too. Even though he'd just met her, he was sure he wanted to show her off in town. They were all expecting her. He wouldn't be surprised if they'd baked a cake for her, welcoming her to Boone's Gulch. That's the kind of people he grew up with. They were caring and nurturing. "So, I know I didn't tell you a lot about my sisters," Daniel said, unwilling for there to be any uncomfortable pauses in their conversation. He wanted her to be completely at ease with him. That way, when she was bombarded by questions from his sisters, she wouldn't feel quite as overwhelmed. They really aren't hard to deal with, and if a brother can say something like that as the only man in the family, you know it means something. They are hard-working and caring. Anna raised her eyebrows at him. "They work? Where do they work?" "By hard-working, I mean they do a lot of charity work." "They aren't married yet. That seems a bit odd that none of you are married. I hope that doesn't offend you." Daniel shook his head. He and his sisters had been questioned about that at length over the years. 2 of his sisters had been courted by unworthy men. He shrugged. "It isn't for lack of trying. Rose and Amelia have both had multiple marriage proposals. It just didn't work out for them. Either the man was not worth his salt, or my sister didn't care for him the way he cared for her." "I thought all the women in the West were married or accounted for," Anna said. "My aunt says there aren't very many women here." "That's changed in the last 10 to 20 years, Daniel replied. "More women are here now than before. They just had to come from somewhere else and get married, and have little girls. That's how all the women are here now." They both laughed. "That actually does make sense," Anna said, nodding. "But Emma, she's 23, she's a sweet girl but not really very knowledgeable. She's smart but, well, she doesn't retain the information she learns. Does that make sense?" Anna nodded. "Rose is the one in the middle of them. I'm the oldest, then comes Amelia, then Rose, then Emma. Amelia is 26, almost 2 years younger than me. Rose is 25 and Emma is 23. And you lost your parents how long ago?" "About 10 years. It's just been us since then. I was 17 and old enough to take care of my sisters responsibly. I'd already started working at the press." Anna turned her head to give him a close look. "The press?" "That's my job, yes. I bought the printing press after I finished my schooling. I run the newspaper from here. We send it to most of the Utah outlets, but unfortunately, the news is never really new unless you're reading about something happening here in Boone's Gulch." "That sounds very interesting," Anna gushed enthusiastically. "I'd love to help you with that. I didn't know you had your own money." Daniel grunted. "I wish it were a money maker. Unfortunately, it isn't. My sisters and I write most of the articles and do all the research to write them. We've lost money on this venture. We've been depending on my uncle since the death of our parents." "I see. And he doesn't mind this particular venture?" Daniel looked at her, confused at first. She lifted her eyebrows and waved her hands up and down her body. "Oh, you being here? No. He's pretty much the one who insisted on this. You see." Daniel's words were cut off when a sound he hadn't heard for many, many years filled his ears. His heart began to race as the earth began to roll underneath them.
Chapter 11. Anna grabbed the side of the wagon seat and gripped the front edge with her other hand. She turned frightened eyes to Daniel. What's happening?" Is this an earthquake? Yep. She'd never seen a man as calm as Daniel was. He grabbed her hand and pulled her to his side of the wagon. We've got to get on the ground. But that's what's opening up. We might get swallowed up. We can't stay here, Daniel insisted. He grabbed the reins and slapped them so the horses would gallop into town. They were on the outskirts when the earth started to rumble. Anna was amazed at what she was seeing. It was as if the ground was rippling. The horses were terrified, but running in a straight line down the road, heading into town. Anna held on to Daniel with all her might. She saw a barn in the distance crumbling to the ground on one side, and pressed her face into his vest, unwilling to witness any more. What if she saw someone get killed? We're in town. We have to see if anyone has been hurt. But the ground is still rumbling, Anna cried out over the sound of people screaming and the earth wrenching below them. We have to get somewhere safe. Daniel gave her a somber look. There is nowhere safe to go, Anna, he said. You can stay here if you want. I have to go help. Anna shook her head. No, I want to help. I have some medical knowledge from my father, who worked medical in the war. He taught me how to bandage, and things to look for in case of infection. That's not all, but that might be relevant here, don't you think? Daniel gave her a look like she had just announced she was an angel sent straight from God. Come with me, he said. He jumped down from the wagon and held his hands up to her. She allowed him to put them around her waist and lift her out. When she was on the ground, he grabbed her hand and pulled her away from the worst of the earthquake, which seemed to be moving east to west, taking down the buildings that were in the middle of town but leaving the ones beyond it to the north and south standing. Anna guessed that the foundations were likely cracked completely, and some of the buildings still standing would be declared unsafe after the earthquake. From the destruction to the middle of town, she wouldn't be surprised. Anna ran with Daniel away from the damage, stopping only when he did. They were at the tailor's. Daniel was trying to bust through the door, which looked like it had been put in at an angle. He stepped back from it, lifted one leg and busted through with one swift kick in the right place. Anna's eyes widened as she followed Daniel into the building. There were two small girls on the floor. One of them was lying on her side, blood in the strands of her light brown hair. The other girl was sitting with her legs against her chest, her arms holding them to her. Her face was buried between her knees and she was sobbing. I'll help them, Anna said quickly. You go out and see who else you can help. Daniel nodded. Before he left, he looked down at the little girls. Barbara, tell me where your pa is, honey. Is he here? The little girl who was crying looked up at him, shaking her head. He went to the bakery to get us some cake, the little girl said between hiccups and sobs. Anna's heart went out to the child. She must feel terribly guilty, because her father was in danger while doing something for her and her sister. This is Barbara Wright, and her little sister Andrea, Daniel said to Anna. Their father is a real tall, slender man with dark brown hair. If you see him before I do, tell him you're with me. Everyone is expecting a stranger in town today, but with this happening, I doubt they will remember. Can you take care of Andrea? It looks like she's not conscious. Anna had already leaned over the little girl and was examining her. She's breathing, she said over her shoulder. She looked at Barbara. I'm going to need you to be very strong for me right now, Barbara, okay? I need you to be brave for your sister. Can you do that for me? Barbara sucked in her tears and held her breath, nodding. Anna brushed a few sweaty strands of hair from the girl's frightened face. I need you to bring me a pitcher of water and some towels. Can you do that? Are you strong enough to carry a pitcher of water? I can do it, Barbara said, getting to her feet. I'm strong enough. Anna glanced at Daniel when he squeezed her shoulder, and then left the building. Within a few minutes, the little girl was back with 2 towels and a pitcher of water, which she was holding against her chest with both hands. She was trying to walk quickly, and the water was sloshing back and forth, but Barbara managed to get it back with 3/4 of the water still in it. That's wonderful, Barbara, Anna praised the girl. Now there's something else I want you to do. Do you live here with your father and mother? Barbara nodded. While Anna cleaned up the wound on Andrea's head, she sent Barbara on several missions the 8-year-old could accomplish. She sent her for a sewing kit and for Andrea's favorite doll. It was upstairs, Barbara said, but the stairs were still standing and the earth had stopped quaking. Anna watched as the little girl went up the steps, her heart thumping anxiously. Just because they looked stable didn't mean they were. And what if the earth started to shake again? Anna knew about aftershocks, though she'd never personally been in an earthquake. She dreaded going outside and seeing the devastation. Is she going to be okay? Barbara asked when Anna had the head wound cleaned up. The little girl still wasn't conscious, despite the aid Anna had given her, and she couldn't help being a little worried about that. It wasn't good for someone with a head wound to be unconscious. She turned inquisitive eyes to the little girl who was conscious. I think she will be okay, but there's something we need to do first. Do you know what smelling salts are? Barbara nodded, which was a complete surprise to Anna. You do? Okay, how about you go and get those smelling salts and bring them to me, okay? We need to get her awake. She should be awake. But won't her head hurt so much if she's awake? Barbara asked. Anna gave the girl a reluctant look. It's better for her to have a headache than not wake up at all, don't you think? Barbara's eyes opened wide, and she nodded emphatically. I think they are in the washroom or the kitchen. I'll go check. Anna nodded. Try to hurry. She needs to be awake so we know she's all right. It was just a few minutes later that the young girl returned, proudly showing Anna a small box of smelling salts. Anna opened the box and took one of the small tubular items out. She snapped it in half and held it up under Andrea's nose. The little girl's eyes opened wide and she began to cough. Moments later, she was moaning and trying to sit up. What happened to her anyway? Anna asked Barbara as she helped Andrea sit up and then pulled the child on her lap to rock with her for a moment. She was coming down the stairs when the earth started to roll, Barbara answered. I couldn't catch her. She fell all the way down. It was then that Anna noticed several other minor scratches and scrapes on the girl's legs and arms. Her dress was ripped in several places as well, as if they had caught on something on the way down. Poor child. I'm glad the two of you weren't buried under the rubble, though. Barbara nodded. Ma said there was a quake like this before I was born. She said a lot of people died, and some of them laid under there for days before they were found. I've read that can happen, Anna said. She looked down at the child in her arms, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. You're going to be all right, my dear. I'm going to stay here with you until your pa comes back, all right? My name is Anna. See, I have your sister here to help too. She's helped so much. Andrea just looked at her, and then her sister. She said nothing as she pressed herself into Anna's warm embrace.
Chapter 12. As soon as Daniel left Anna and the girls in the tailor's, he ran across the street and headed north. There were several businesses, residences, and the church on the north side of their small town. With a heavy heart, he saw plumes of smoke rising in the air. He ran toward the smoke, dismayed to see it was coming from the church. There was a tremendous hole in the roof where it had caved in, and flames were reaching up from inside, licking the sky and shooting off sparks. Oh no, he murmured. God help us. He ran to the church as fast as he could, ignoring the smoke that was pouring out of the building. The front door had broken in half, the bottom having slid to the side and jutted itself in the side of the building. He wasn't the only one who had come to the church. Several other men and women had surrounded it, all of them calling out to each other. Another tremendous sound made them all pause for a moment. The half of the church roof that hadn't yet collapsed was about to. Daniel looked around. Has anyone seen Pastor John? Anyone seen him? He's not still inside, is he? I didn't see him come out, Daniel, one of the women in the small crowd said to him, her voice mournful. He recognized her as Annabelle, the church secretary. I don't know if he's in there or not, but... Daniel didn't wait for her to finish. He ran up on the porch, to the many protests of the people on the lawn. You're going to die, Daniel, he heard. Don't do it. But he had to get the pastor out if he could. He had to try. If it looked insurmountable, he would leave right away and save himself. But if he didn't try, he would never forgive himself. Pastor John was the man who had married his parents, and he was supposed to marry the West children to their spouses as well. He was a treasured, beloved part of Boone's Gulch. Daniel had to do something. He ducked down and passed through the lower half of the church front door, entering a room that was nearly filled with smoke. He lifted his shirt to cover his mouth and nose, and only lowered it long enough to call out to the pastor. "John," he yelled out. "John. Where are you?" He heard a distant call from the back of the church where the offices were, and ran in that direction. He put his hand on the pastor's office door to feel if it was very hot on the other side. He bent down and looked under through the crack but saw no flames. He saw a lot of smoke, though. "I'm coming in," he yelled. "I'm gonna kick down the door, so get back." He lifted his leg up and repeated the action on the door that he'd used to get in the tailor's shop. Pastor John was lying on the ground on his back. He was cut up in many places, most significantly a gruesome-looking cut to one cheek. Daniel ran to him and grabbed him around the shoulders. "Can you run?" he asked. "Walk? Can you get to your feet at all?" The pastor looked him dead in the eye. "I can certainly try," he said in a weak voice. He grabbed Daniel's shoulder and used it and all his strength to pull himself to a sitting position. This caused him to cry out in pain, but he did it. He proceeded, with Daniel's help, to stand up. He hobbled toward the door, one arm around Daniel's shoulders, the other one holding his shirt up over his mouth and nose. Daniel did the same, but the weight of the older, bigger man was tough for him to bear. He prayed for strength and struggled to get the pastor through the sanctuary and out the door. "Remind me," the pastor said breathlessly, "to put a back door in this church." Daniel let out an abrupt laugh, happy for the momentary reprieve. "I'll do that, John. I'll do that." He managed to get the pastor to the front of the church. The flames were threatening on both sides, and Daniel was running out of breath. He needed clean oxygen. He needed to get outside before he passed out. His strength was being sapped from him every second. Pushing himself to his limits, he dropped to his knees, wrapped his arms around the pastor, and dragged the big man through the hole in the front door. As soon as he was free of the building, he began gulping in breaths of fresh air. His throat and eyes were burning painfully. But it wasn't the end. He had to get the pastor to the lawn, where they would be far enough away from the burning building that the smoke could no longer bother them. The pastor had been in the building longer than he had. The pain Daniel was experiencing from the smoke inhalation was horrible. He could only imagine how John felt. He continued to push for more energy and strength as he pulled John toward the steps of the church. Relief swept through him when he saw two men who had been waiting outside leap up the steps and grab the pastor. Another man followed behind them and grabbed Daniel. "Unbelievable, Daniel. You're a true hero." Daniel shook his head. "No. Not a hero. Just trying to do what's right." "Shut up, you hero," the man replied in a teasing voice. Daniel looked up to see who it was. It was Dirk, the tailor, the father of the two little girls he had left in Anna's care. "Your daughters, your girls." Daniel tried to tell the man his daughters would be all right. "They're all right, Daniel. Stop talking. You're going to make it worse for yourself if you don't just take it easy." Daniel swallowed and immediately regretted it. The pain was almost unbearable. He grabbed the canteen Diana, the seamstress who worked with Dirk, brought to him. He turned the water up and began to pour it over his eyes and into his mouth. The pain was excruciating. He didn't even know if that's what he was supposed to do. But he didn't want to go blind, and he wanted to breathe again, so he did it anyway. "Careful, careful," Dirk said. "Don't drown yourself." Daniel was just beginning to feel a slight bit of relief when he noticed the church secretary, Annabelle, was being held by one of the other ladies. She was sobbing uncontrollably. There were 4 men bent over the pastor on the ground. They all had their heads bowed. None of them were rendering first aid. Chills covered Daniel's body. He wrenched away from Dirk and Diana, stumbling over to the men surrounding the prone body of the pastor. He pushed one of them aside to lay his eyes on the old man he'd gone in to save. When he saw that John's eyes were closed and his chest wasn't raising and falling, his heart plummeted to his stomach. Now he had a new stinging sensation in his eyes and throat as tears came to the surface. "No," he cried out, dropping to the ground and bending over the old man. "No, no. John, wake up. Wake up." He lowered his forehead to the man's chest, letting the tears flow, one hand on John's shoulder, the other on his side. His chest remained still. He wasn't breathing. "No, no, no," Daniel moaned repeatedly as he cried. "Oh, John. My friend. My friend. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Chapter 13. With a heavy heart, Daniel left the church and headed back to find Anna. The only thing he could think about was getting to his house and checking on his sisters. When he saw Anna in the distance, sitting on a broken set of steps with Barbara clutched to her side and Andrea on her lap, he ran to them. He was only a few feet away when the earth shook under his feet. Adrenaline shot through him. He looked at the ground, but it didn't stop moving. It was just an aftershock. The momentary confusion gone, Daniel closed the distance between himself and Anna. He squatted in front of them, eyeing the two girls, who looked frightened and dirty, but alive and healthy. He rested one hand on Andrea's head. "I'm glad you ladies are all safe. Your pa going to be here any minute now, okay? He had to help with the church. It's on fire, you see." Barbara nodded. "We could see it, and Anna told us." "Are we gonna have to build a new church?" The innocence in Andrea's voice pulled on Daniel's heartstrings. He thought about the loss of Pastor John, which made the pain double. "I'm afraid we are," he replied. "But that's okay. We'll all get together and build it in a weekend. No problem." Andrea looked only slightly happy to hear that. Both girls' eyes averted to over his shoulder, and when their faces lit up, he guessed their father was behind him. "Pa." Andrea pushed herself from Anna, and both girls ran to their father. Daniel glanced over his shoulder to take in the reunion for a moment, before turning back to Anna. "I've got to go check on my sisters. I can't imagine what the house must look like. Do you want to stay here and help out?" Anna shook her head, pushing up to her feet. He stood up straight as well. "I want to come with you. If I'm to be your wife, your family is the priority." Daniel's heart warmed over and he grabbed her hand. "Let's go." He tried not to look at the destruction of the buildings around him. It would make him want to help if he saw someone in need. His sisters needed him too. Like Anna said, they had to be the priority. Plus he had servants in the house that might need help. They were both in the wagon shortly thereafter as it barreled down the road, the horses running at full speed. Daniel slapped the reins, knowing the animals couldn't go any faster. His heart was racing just as quickly as their hooves beat against the ground. He saw Anna grab the rail beside her when the wagon took a wild bump that sent them both jostling back and forth against each other. He didn't mind when her other hand latched onto his thigh. He glanced over at her and saw terror in her eyes. It was a shame Anna's first day in his hometown had to be marred by terrible devastation. Just that morning, the town had been bustling, everyone going about their business, laughing, enjoying the nice weather. Now it was in ruins. He could see the state of his house and property as soon as he pulled the wagon onto the pathway leading to it. They emerged from the trees into a vast clearing that was now riddled with ruts in the ground that ran from one side of the property to the other. It appeared the earthquake had affected only one side of the house. It was almost like it had made a jagged line through the middle of it. The east side had gotten hit the worst. The roof had collapsed on the upper floor, and it seemed like the house tilted toward the ground under that area. "Good Lord," he murmured, his heart aching for the material items that were lost. He would refuse to believe anything bad had happened to his sisters until he was confronted with the truth. If that was the truth. "I'm sure your sisters are all right," Anna said reassuringly. It was a nice try, and Daniel appreciated it. But neither of them knew if that was true or not. He pulled the horses to a stop when they came upon a deep crack that just barely missed the foundation of the fountain Daniel's father had put smack in the middle of the front lawn. Anna jumped down before he had a chance to go around to give her a hand. Both of them ran toward the house, jumping over tree branches and areas of the ground that were now jutted up into the air, creating small hills. "This way," Daniel said, waving his hand. "There's a door around back. Let's see if that's a good way to go in." The front door wasn't an option. The porch had collapsed in, and debris was piled in front of it. Before he started running, he reached back and took Anna's hand. He looked her directly in the eyes, worried that she wouldn't want to stay after a beginning like this. It was as if she read his mind. "Don't panic," she said quickly. "Let's see what's happened first." Daniel nodded, keeping himself under control. He looked up at the windows, noting which bedrooms had been taken out. With a jab of fear, he realized one of the rooms that had collapsed belonged to Emma. "Emma," he called out, cupping his mouth with one hand. "Emma? Rose? Amelia? Is anyone here?" Anna squeezed his hand as they went up the 3 lonesome-looking concrete steps to a back door. "Would they have left, do you think?" she asked. "I don't think so," Daniel said. "They knew I was bringing you. They all wanted to meet you at the same time." He hated the way his voice sounded so strained. He wanted to be strong and confident in front of the woman. He was taken off guard by the sudden earthquake. "Emma?" Anna yelled out unexpectedly as soon as they passed over the threshold, making him jump. "Amelia. Rose?" Daniel stopped and listened. The house was creaking. He thought he could hear voices and sounds coming from several places in the house. "I'll check upstairs if I can get up there," he said. "You go to the other side of the house and see who is safe." "No one was outside," Anna remarked. "I think that's strange, unless they're in here trying to find other people. Surely they weren't all caught under the rubble." Daniel nodded, glancing at her. He hoped she was right. "Go on now. I'm gonna check in the front of the house." The porch fell in, but it looked like the structure was solid over the front door. They separated, and Daniel ran from the room into the hallway. He headed toward the front and came around to take in the stairs. Shaking his head in amazement, he ran his eyes up the staircase, which was wide and curved at the sides like an hourglass. It had red carpet on it, and now had a line making its way up. The left side had fallen completely, and the other side looked like it was barely holding. Daniel went as far to the right as he could, and pulled himself up by the railing, clutching it tight, just in case the steps went out from under his feet. With a pounding heart, he continued to call for his sisters. He could hear one of them, but couldn't tell which it was until he got closer. It was Emma. "Emma?" Daniel called to her, reaching the top of the steps and seeing a horrible sight in front of him. The roof had come down on her room, and he could see the sky. It had fallen at a slant, which might have saved his sister's life. "Daniel," he heard her call. "I'm under the bed. Help me." "I'm coming," he called back, racing to the room and dropping to his knees in front of where her door had been, but was now broken into several parts that were scattered in the hallway outside. He peered through the space between the roof and the floor. He could just barely see the bed his sister had hidden under. The 4 posters on top had broken off when the roof fell, but the frame of the bed was still intact. He tried to look for a way to get through the rubble to his sister. "Are you able to come any closer to me?" "I can only get out about a foot before I'm blocked," Emma called back. "Are you hurt at all?" "Just knocked about a bit," she replied. "Scared out of my mind. I don't see how I'm going to get out of here. I'm trapped." "We'll figure something out, Emma." Daniel tried to sound as reassuring as he could. "You just wait there. I'll be right back." Daniel backed away from Emma's room and looked over his shoulder to the side of the house still standing. He ran through different options in his mind and scanned the broken path to the bed in Emma's room. At least the place wasn't on fire like the church. Pastor John's face ran through Daniel's mind, and he had to push away the sadness that washed over him. Daniel. Where are you going? Emma called, her voice frightened. I'm going to figure out a way to get you out, Em, he replied loudly. You stay under there and don't move a muscle, okay? Not until I tell you to. I'm scared, Daniel. His sister's voice was weak. You stay with me. I'm going to get you out. Just be strong and stay with me. His eyes fell on a side table sitting against the wall on the side of the house that was still solid. An idea popped into his mind, and he hurried to it. He toppled it over, stepped back and kicked at each of the legs until they were all broken off. He took the 4 legs back to Emma's room with him. I'm going to come in, he said, sounding confident. I'll try to prop up the roof and clear out what's below it so you can climb through. Do you hear? I hear. Please hurry. I feel like the floor is shifting below me. With a trepidatious heart, Daniel dropped to his knees and began to crawl through the room, moving debris out of the way and shoving the table legs under the fallen roof. He had no idea if it was helping, or if the legs would be strong enough to hold the remainder of the roof, without the rubble keeping it from collapsing completely. But he had to try.
Chapter 14. Anna ran through the house, calling out for the girls. Miss? Miss? She heard someone's voice and went toward it. The door to the cellar was cracked open, and she could see someone in the crack, staring at her. It was a young woman dressed in a maid's outfit. Are you hurt? Anna asked frantically, running toward the door. Is it over? The young woman asked, pushing it open just a little more and peering down the hallway with terrified eyes. I think it is, yes. You need to be outside. You shouldn't stay in here. The whole house could come down. She instantly wished she hadn't said that, as the young maid's face washed out and her eyes widened. I couldn't get out the front door. There's stuff in the way. Anna held out her hand as soon as she got to the door. If you can't get out that way, you can get out the back. But Johnson is hurt. I can't carry him. I don't think both of us can carry him. He was getting supplies from the cellar, and one of the shelves collapsed on him. Is that why you're still down there? The girl nodded. Well, take me to him. I'll help him how I can, and maybe we can get him outside. The girl pushed the door open so Anna could pass through, and they went quickly down the steps. The cellar was a mess. Everything that had been stocked on the shelves had fallen off and was scattered about the floor. A man sat against one of the load-bearing beams, his head down, his shoulders slumped. A lantern next to him provided enough light for Anna to see he was bleeding. His shirt was blood-soaked from his waist to the middle of his chest. Concern for him shot through her. She realized she didn't have anything to really help him with. She needed bandages and alcohol and a needle and thread. She hurried to him anyway, taking the lantern from the ground and holding it close when she dropped to her knees. He was awake, but in obvious pain. Johnson? I'm Anna. I'm going to try to help you. Do you know where you're bleeding from? Let me see here. She slowly lifted his arm from his stomach where he was pressing it. There was a deep gash in his skin from his ribcage to his waist. His shirt looked like it had been sliced with a knife. Anna took a moment to wonder what had done this to him. She looked over her shoulder at the maid. Are there any supplies down here at all that we can use? The girl shook her head. Which side of the house is the kitchen on? Anna further inquired. The girl looked like she didn't understand the question. Anna tried not to let frustration make her snippy. The kitchen, girl. Which side of the house is it on? That side. She pointed toward the side of the house that hadn't gotten the brunt of the earthquake. I need you to listen to me and do this quickly, Anna said. He's bleeding a lot, and I can see you've both been trying to keep that under control. You need to go to the kitchen, or wherever you might have some towels stored. I need water and towels first. After you bring them to me, if you can find bandages of any kind and a needle and strong thread, that would be good. And some whiskey, Johnson added. Anna's eyes shot to his face to find he was grinning through tremendous pain. She could see in his eyes that he didn't think any part of it was funny. She looked back at the girl. Yes. Bring whiskey. He'll need it, I think. I'll be back with the towels and water. The maid disappeared up the steps, her own lantern bobbing back and forth. Are you in a lot of pain? Anna asked, peeling away the blood-soaked shirt to look at the long gash the man was holding together with his own hand. I can safely say I'm in more pain than I've been in ever before, Johnson replied. Anna looked around for anything she could use. When she saw nothing but dirt and debris, she stood up and reached down to the hem of her skirt. She pulled it up and bit into it, ripping it slightly. She made the rip bigger, and kept pulling until it separated from the rest of her skirt. She used the cloth to fashion a bandage on top of the wound. Hold this against that. It's going to be bloody pretty quickly, but I'm going to see if I can find some more somewhere around here. You can use anything. I have on. Johnson's voice wavered when he spoke. Stay with me, Johnson, Anna said sharply, pressing the fabric over the wound. Stay with me. That maid there. She seems competent. What do you think of her? Maggie? Johnson rested his head back against the load-bearing beam. Yeah, Maggie's one of the good ones. They say it's hard to find good help, but she's one of the good help. Efficient and fast in her work. He closed his eyes and swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Stay with me, Johnson, Anna said. He rolled his head and opened his eyes to look at her. I'm here. I'm just really tired. That's because you're losing so much blood. We have to get it stopped, and I need to sew up this wound as soon as possible. I need to check to see how deep it is, but I can't do that until I can clean it up. I'm sure Maggie will be back with the things you need, he swallowed, very soon. Very soon. Anna was sure the man was going to lose consciousness. She grabbed his shoulders and squeezed. Hold on. Hold on. He nodded. I'm here. I'm all right. I'll be all right. His head rolled to the side and fear shot through Anna. Johnson. She slapped his face lightly. Johnson, wake up. Wake up. The door above slammed open, and Maggie came down the stairs in a hurry. She caught sight of Johnson and gave a small cry. No time to hesitate, Anna said quickly, holding out her hands for the towels. We must act quickly. I'll clean him up. You go up and get the bandages, the needle and thread, and the whiskey. Hurry now. Maggie set the bucket of sloshing water down next to Anna, and dashed back to the steps. Anna turned away from the woman, and began to wash Johnson the best she could. The towels were immediately red from the blood. She squeezed it out on the ground near her, and continued washing. She used a clean wet towel to wipe Johnson's face, hoping he would wake up. It wasn't good for him to be asleep. He could succumb to the injury. Wake up, she whispered, wishing she had some smelling salts. A few minutes later, Maggie reappeared with the other supplies Anna had asked for. She set the whiskey bottle down right beside the man, and prepared the needle and thread to stitch up his chest and stomach. As soon as she drew the needle through his skin, his eyes popped open and he sucked in a deep breath. She withdrew her hands so she wouldn't stab herself or hurt him when he moved abruptly. Jeff. Jeff, Maggie said, circling him and kneeling next to him on the other side. She took his hand and placed it on the whiskey bottle. His wide, confused eyes hovered on her face. It's going to be all right. I'm right here. We're gonna be all right. Anna is gonna take care of you, all right? You're going to be fine. You want a drink? I'm right here for you, Jeff. Right here. Anna watched the young woman take care of the man's mental state while she sewed up his wound. She pressed the compacted gauze against his skin when she was through, hoping the stitches would stay in place. The thread wasn't as strong as she would have liked it to be. You're going to have to be really careful. But I think if you put your weight on me and Maggie, we should be able to get you upstairs and through the back door. You need to be at the clinic and to be seen by the doctor, but I know he's quite busy himself right now. Is it very terrible in town? Maggie asked, her voice strained. Anna gave her a somber look and nodded. Yes, I'm afraid it's not good. Have you been through something like this before? Someone told me there's been a quake like this here before. I don't know, Maggie replied. I have only been in Mr. West's service for 6 months. I am new here. Anna nodded, looking back to Johnson. We're going to try to move you now, okay? Bear with us. It's going to hurt. Oh, I'm sure it will, Johnson grumbled. Pressing one hand against his wound and grabbing Maggie's shoulder with the other, Johnson pulled himself to his feet. Come on. Get me outside, ladies. Chapter 15. Anna and Maggie got Johnson out through the back door, and were met by Daniel and 3 women whom Anna suspected must be his sisters. They had similar characteristics to Daniel, the same noses and eyes. Anna. Daniel came running to her. He placed a firm kiss on her forehead and grabbed Johnson. You all right? Your new woman took care of me, Johnson said with a half grin. But I think I better get to the clinic. I'll take you. Maggie, get Johnson to my wagon. Spread out the blankets in the back and let him lay down there. You stay with him. Anna, these are my sisters. Emma, Amelia, and Rose. They're going to stay here to start cleaning. I'm going back to town. I'll take Johnson with me. Do you want to come back? Do you think my knowledge would be best served here or there? Anna asked. Daniel lifted his eyebrows. She thought he might not have expected that question. You should go with him, Emma said quickly, stepping closer to them. They looked at her. We will take care of things here. If there are any problems, we still have more horses and a buggy we can use. How many are unaccounted for? Daniel asked as the group circled the house to go toward the stables. What? Rose asked. He looked back at his sister. We've got Johnson and Maggie. Where's Edna? Edna's the cook, Emma explained to Anna, who nodded in response. Barney? Daniel asked. Anna looked at them all as they ran toward the stables. She had to assume Barney was the groomsman. Daniel threw open the door to the stables and ran through, calling out for Barney. Right here, boss, the man replied loudly. Anna stayed outside with the sisters, while Daniel quickly surveyed the inside of the stables. She could hear the horses inside whinnying and the men exchanging words. Daniel reappeared moments later. Okay, Barney's fine and the quake missed the stables for the most part. The horses will be fine. Come on, Anna. Let's get back to town. You girls find Edna. Check the kitchen pantry. I hope she wasn't in there, Emma said passionately. She'd be crushed by all those cans and jars. With that, the girl dashed back toward the door they'd emerged from, a desperately worried look on her face. She's not, Maggie murmured, stepping toward the wagon. She's not in the pantry. Then we don't need to wait to see if she needs to get to the doctor in town. Let's get Johnson going. Daniel grabbed Anna's hand and started pulling her toward the wagon, where Maggie was moving about quickly, making Johnson as comfortable as she could. The two ran and made it to the wagon at the same time. Anna pulled herself up on one side, and Daniel on the other. He looked over his shoulder. He all right? You secure? Yeah, go ahead. He needs to get to the clinic. But I think you did a good job, miss. Thank you for helping him. Anna wondered about the relationship between the two servants. They looked somewhat alike, making her think they might be related. You're very welcome. Anna grabbed the railing beside her when the wagon jerked into motion. She heard Johnson groan and Maggie console him in a gentle voice. It didn't sound like the words of a smitten woman. It sounded like the tone a sister would use with her brother. I'm so sorry about all this, Anna, Daniel said. She looked at him and saw the depressed look on his handsome face. I can't believe this happened the first day you came here. What a way to start a new life. Well, it will be exciting, if it's always like this, Anna replied, trying to bring a little humor to the situation. Of course, this isn't the way I wanted it to go, on my arrival. But there's certainly nothing you could have done to predict or prevent this. Please don't think I blame you. She shook her head. He gave her a compassionate look. I don't want you to be scared away. Our town is thriving normally. I mean it was. I don't know how long it will take for us to rebuild from this. Is there enough money to do the repairs? She asked quietly. He looked at her. I don't know. It will depend on the individuals, as well as the community. We will help as much as we can. But our money is tied up at the moment. It won't be as easy to get hold of it as it normally would be. Anna was completely confused by that statement. She didn't feel it was her place to discuss the West's finances. She wasn't yet a part of the family, and even when she was, it would be Daniel who would deal with those matters. She just blinked at him. Well, I'll do whatever you need me to do to help. I don't have a terribly large amount of money of my own, but I have 2 working hands and I'm willing. He gave her a warm smile, reached over and took her hand. I'm glad you're here though, he said softly. I really want to get to know you, find out what's ticking in that head of yours. I hope you don't want to leave when this is all over. Anna shook her head. I doubt that will happen, Daniel. I see no reason why I would help rebuild the community just to leave it. She smiled at him. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. There are people wounded and probably missing, buried under the rubble from the earthquake. I think we better concentrate on helping them, since we missed the brunt of it all. Daniel glanced back as the wagon bounced down the jutted road. My house didn't though. That's not going to be cheap to repair. I'm sorry, Anna said instinctively. The look on Daniel's face changed from sadness to appreciation when he glanced at her. Now you're apologizing for something you couldn't control. We are a pair, aren't we? Yes, we are. She squeezed his hand and smiled. I'm real impressed with the work you did on Johnson. Do you know a lot about medicine? I've been thinking about going into the field, being a nurse and helping people. My father was a medic in the army and taught me everything he knew before he died. I started learning very young, and I guess you could say I absorbed the information and never forgot it. You must have a very sharp mind, Daniel said, giving her an odd look. I like to think I'm one of the smart ones, Anna replied softly with a grin. And you do have a lovely little community of people here. Andrea and Barbara kept introducing me to everyone while you were at the church. By the way, did you say the church had been destroyed? I don't remember saying it, but I might as well have, he replied, shaking his head. The pastor. John, he didn't make it. I tried to pull him from the building in time, but he was too far gone. No telling how long he'd been in there, trapped in that fire. And the church itself. Anna's heart dropped when he looked at her, shaking his head. Gone. Oh, Daniel, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's probably where most of my money will go, Daniel continued, to repairs and such. Most of the other buildings and businesses are owned by someone who can take care of their repair costs. But the church, there might be a petty cash account at the bank, but I highly doubt it will cover the amount that will be needed. The place burned to the ground. His voice sounded so sad. Anna assumed he had been close to the pastor that died, and the church he'd gone to. The actual building doesn't mean as much as the person, he said. But it really upsets me. We were supposed to be married there. That's where my parents were married. It was a staple in this town, and so was he. Anna rubbed his back. That's so awful. I'm so sorry. Another bad thing about it, though it's not the worst thing by any means because that would be selfish, well, I don't know how else we're going to be married. I don't know anyone who can do the service for us. We might have to leave town for it. But it won't be the same. I wanted to marry you in a church, and have a nice wedding officiated by the same pastor who married my folks. Anna listened to him, compassion squeezing her heart. And I have to get married. I only have a short time left. My sisters put together a... Wait a minute, Anna interrupted him, looking closely at his profile. Did you say you only have a short time left? 100 things raced through Anna's mind, but the one thing that scared her the most was an illness. Was Daniel sick? Was she about to take care of an invalid for the rest of her life? He looked strong and healthy. Surely that couldn't be it. But what else could a cryptic comment like that mean? Her stomach twisted in knots when he gave her a sober look. Let me explain.
Chapter 16. They were still 5 minutes or so from town. Daniel's heart was pounding. Not only was he going to tell Anna the reason he'd called for her to come marry him, but he was doing it during the aftermath of a devastating earthquake. If both combined didn't scare her off, he didn't know what would. I don't know if I should have explained this to you before or not. I hope it doesn't bother you too much. He could tell by her apprehensive look that she was expecting something terrible. It occurred to him that saying he only had a short time left could have meant some pretty devastating things. I'm not dying, he said quickly, glancing at her. I'm sorry if I gave you that impression. It was obviously what she'd been thinking because her shoulders relaxed and she pulled in a soft breath. Okay. She looked like she was accepting that fact and continued, so what did you mean by that then? Daniel chewed on his upper lip for a moment, bracing himself to tell her what he needed to say. The reason I sent for a mail-order bride is because I have to get married before my next birthday. That's in 2 weeks. If I don't get married, my sisters and I will be devastated, left on our own financially. It was a condition in my uncle's will. The money is ours, you see, about half of it, left to us by our parents. But they put him in charge, and he decided to play about, I guess you could say. He wasn't a very kind man. Anna frowned. He couldn't tell whether she was confused by what he'd said or not. He didn't know if she had any way of understanding any of it. Her next words cleared it up for him. No, I would say he must not have been. There's no way you can legally get around that, to get the money left to you by your parents? Our lawyer is very capable. Well, my uncle's lawyer anyway. Henry Lancaster. I think he will work with us now, as long as the money gets passed to us. If he knew of a loophole, I'm sure he'd find it. He wasn't too fond of Uncle Clarence either. He was a client, not a friend. Anna nodded, an understanding look on her face. So you have to be married in 2 weeks or you'll lose your money. That's right. He waited anxiously to see how she would react. She seemed to be thinking about it. Well, there must be a way to make it happen. It's all right if we have to go to the courthouse. I'm sure someone there will be able to do it for us. I know it's not what you wanted. At least, it certainly doesn't seem like it. I'm sure you did want the big wedding in the church with all your friends around. But, well, as long as you're married by then, we can just have a big wedding later if that's what you want. The people you care about the most can come with us if we go to the nearest town to get it done. Daniel tilted his head. Are you sure you don't mind? She shook her head. Of course not. I don't mind having a smaller wedding. I even have a wedding dress already. Oh, do you now? Daniel gave her a soft smile, barely lifting the corners of his mouth. I do. She looked nervous. He wondered why but hesitated to pry. They rode along quietly for just a few moments before she said something that took him completely by surprise. I was supposed to be married by now. The ceremony would have taken place about 6 weeks ago. He stared at her in confusion. 6 weeks ago? What happened? When she told him, he felt a little crushed. How could a man do something like to a woman he'd professed to love and adore? The reason I was looking to leave Lerner is because I was left the day of my wedding. Not exactly at the altar, but close enough. His name was Sean. He sent a message to me through the woman he really wanted to be with, to tell me he was marrying her instead. Daniel felt anger boiling up inside him. There was nothing at all he could do about what happened to Anna, but the thought of what had been done infuriated him. The more she spoke, the more enraged he became. But he kept it inside, and by the time they got to town, he was pumped with energy and ready to take on some heavy debris. She laughed at me, Anna said in a devastatingly hurt voice that only exacerbated how Daniel was feeling. Right in my face. Told me I was supposed to give her my wedding dress. My dress. The one that was fitted just for me. I admit I didn't pay for it, but it was made for me and my body size. I told her she was too fat to fit in it and ran out. Her last words struck him as funny. He felt the heavy weight of his anger lift and had to let out an abrupt laugh. You told her that? Really? Anna looked at him, and he was relieved to see a bit of amusement in her eyes. She nodded. I did say that to her. Well, I'm proud of you, Anna. I think that was brave of you. And what a horrible thing to do to someone. What they did to you was wrong. I'm not surprised you came here. I wouldn't want to stay in a place like that either. I reckon they had a lot of friends to help intimidate you. As a matter of fact, they did. Anna's voice hardened when she responded. The more time Daniel spent with this woman, the more resilient she turned out to be. His admiration for her was steadily growing. Well, you won't get treatment like that here. My sisters are on board and have been privy to our correspondence. I don't keep anything from them unless knowing won't help them. And I usually find that telling them is better than explaining later. They aren't upset that a new woman has come into the house? Anna asked. He shook his head. Not at all. They've been after me to find a wife for a while. I had resigned myself to living with them, since it doesn't look like they're going anywhere anytime soon. He chuckled a bit and was glad when she giggled lightly. They encouraged me to do this. It wasn't even my idea. But I'm glad you're here. And it does seem like God wanted you here during this time. Without your knowledge of medicine and doctoring injuries, Johnson could have died back there. But you saved his life. Anna flushed and bit her bottom lip, dropping her head. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Anna, Daniel said firmly. Those people in Lerner don't know what they lost. I think we've gained an angel. You're too kind, Anna said. I'm only speaking the truth. The wagon bumped over a severe rut in the road, tossing Anna against Daniel and making Johnson roll over onto his side in the back. He would have continued rolling if Maggie wasn't seated directly next to him. The maid grabbed him around his waist and held onto him while he moaned in pain. We're almost there, Johnson, Daniel called over his shoulder. Just hold on. Stay with us. Doing my best, boss, the man said in an agonized voice. I'm doing my best. They crossed the town limits and headed into the chaos that was ever so slowly being cleaned up. Debris and rubble was still scattered all around them. Daniel had to carefully maneuver the wagon so it wouldn't go down into small craters caused by the quake and break a wheel. Looks like the clinic is overrun, he said, narrowing his eyes at the small building in the distance. He slid his gaze across the street to the community building and noticed people were going in there as well. Everyone who knows anything about medicine will be here right now, he said, looking over at Anna. We need to find the town doctor and see if he needs you anywhere. I'm going to use my strength and help with the cleanup. You use your brain and help people live. Deal? She smiled at him. That's a deal, Daniel. Daniel pulled the wagon up into the only open area in front of the community building. He called out to a man standing with his fists firmly on his waist and his narrow eyes taking in the movement of the people around him. Jack. Need your help, friend. It's Johnson. He's been hurt. Jack turned and looked at him for just a moment before hurrying toward them. Oh. Now, what's going on here with you? He pulled himself up in the back of the wagon, bent at the knees and scooped Johnson up into his arms. I'll help, hold on. Daniel made an attempt to climb over into the bed of the wagon. No, I got him, Jack said, moving to the edge of the wagon and jumping down as if he wasn't carrying a nearly 200-pound man. There's plenty of other people around here who could use your help. This is Anna, Daniel introduced her. She's got some experience with wounds. She did that there. Pa was an army medic. Think you can find the doc for her so she can find out how she can help. Jack looked at Anna, who was climbing down from the wagon. I can do that, boss. Come with me, Anna. Let's find Doc.
Chapter 17. Anna had no idea what Dr. Lenny Baker looked like. But when she saw him, she knew who he was instinctively. He had the look of a doctor. He was slender, short, and balding, wearing spectacles with bright, sharp eyes behind them. The community building was awash with moans, and the smell of blood from the moment Anna walked in. She curled her nose but was quickly used to it. She could tell the difference between the people who were tending to loved ones, as opposed to anyone with medical knowledge. They looked confused and scared. Dr. Baker was moving from person to person, checking them quickly, giving short instructions to anyone helping the injured. He looked confident and determined to Anna. "Doctor?" she called out to him, crossing through the maze of injured people. He didn't stop moving, though he did glance in her direction. "Are you injured?" he asked without stopping his momentum. He knelt next to a young girl who was holding her arm and moaning. He felt it gently, which made the girl cry out. The doctor spoke soothingly to her. "I'm not injured," Anna answered him when he was done tending to the little girl and her wounded arm. "I'm here to help. My father was an army medic. He taught me about treating wounds, and I'd like to offer my services." "That's fantastic news," Dr. Baker replied. "We can use the help around here." He finally stopped moving and spoke directly to her. "You see that cart over there? Right now I need more supplies for it, bandages and such. I need you to run over to the clinic and get those things for me. I'm sure you know what is needed, right?" Anna nodded. "Good. Check the cart to see what's there first, because I don't want to take all the supplies that might be needed at the clinic itself." "Will you have enough for everyone?" Anna asked skeptically, moving her eyes around the room at the devastation. "Fortunately, I have a storage building with extra supplies in case of emergencies. I've kept that stocked for a flood actually. I wasn't expecting an earthquake. It's been a while since we've had to deal with something like this." "I'll go check the cart, doctor," Anna said. "I'll be back with more supplies after I check it." "Thank you." He trailed off, giving her a questioning look. "Anna," she supplied. "Anna Dawson. I'm here with Daniel West." The doctor's face lit up. "Ah yes, the bride he sent for. It's nice to meet you. I'm glad you are able to help us." Anna nodded. "I'll be back." She spun around and headed toward the front of the building where the cart was beside the door. After checking it thoroughly and counting the supplies as opposed to the number of people pouring in and out of the makeshift clinic, she crossed the street to replenish what they needed. There were at least 20 people packed in the small clinic, and the movement seemed more hectic because it was a more restricted space than the community building. A young man was sitting in the corner, his legs up on the chair, one arm wrapped around them. He looked like he was probably in his teen years. He was holding a large cloth to his head that was already splattered with blood. He had his eyes closed, but the pain was obvious on his face. Anna headed toward him. "Are you all right?" she asked awkwardly. "Let me look at your wound. Let me see it." "If I take this away, it will bleed in my eyes," the boy said remorsefully. "I wasn't paying attention. I should have been paying attention." "We'll get you fixed up," Anna said. "Just let me take a look." "I shouldn't even be here," the boy wailed, his voice rising. "I shouldn't even be here. Why is it me and not her? Why me?" He began to sob, which Anna imagined must have made his head hurt even worse, not to mention bleed more. "Shush, you've got to calm down." She sat next to him, putting her arm around his shoulders. Since he hadn't pulled the cloth from his head, she scanned around it. It looked like he'd probably just bumped it hard on something, or something might have fallen on his head. "Who are you talking about?" "Emily," the boy said harshly. "She wouldn't come out. She could have come out when I told her to." Anna tried to speak as gently as she could. "Is Emily your sister?" "Yes. She stayed inside with Zeus." Anna immediately assumed Zeus was a dog. So the boy had lost his sister and his dog. That had to be devastating. "Where are your parents?" she asked. "They're out there helping other people." Anna was relieved to hear they hadn't been taken from the young man, too. Well, let's see what I can do to help you. That's what we're all here for, right? To help each other. No one trying to hurt anyone else. Isn't that right? She dragged out her mundane speech in an effort to keep him distracted, while she gently peeled the corner of the cloth away from his wound. It looked like a puncture mark. She wondered how deep it went. Yes. I reckon that's right. He stopped resisting as much, and let Anna take a look. It was indeed a puncture mark just above his hairline. If he hadn't had thick brown hair, she probably would have seen bone under there from his skull. He'd done a number on himself. I'm going to need to take some of your hair off and make it shorter, she said. Is that okay with you? Yes. Am I going to die? Anna shook her head. Someday you will. But today won't be that day. You rest assured you'll have a bad headache for a while though. But you'll be alive. Thank you for helping me. Anna was sorry for the young man. She wondered how he'd lost his little sister, but didn't want to ask. He was just able to control his tears, and finally letting her tend to him. She went about cleaning his wound, which was easily closed with an adhesive bandage. It was probably terribly painful, but the blood had stopped flowing, and he seemed in better spirits by the time he left, determined to help as much as he could. She watched him go, remembering suddenly what she'd come in for. She looked around for someone who might be able to direct her to the storage room or building. Excuse me, are you hurt? She swiveled to look behind her at a woman about her age with bright but worried eyes. I'm not hurt, she said quickly. Doc Baker sent me over to get as many extra supplies as I can carry, and are available. It must be full over there, the girl said, shaking her head. Follow me. She hurried to the door in the back, and went through into what looked like an office. Anna was right on her heels when she pulled a key from a hook beside the door, and with it in hand she stepped out the back. Anna then noticed a shed about 15 yards from the door. The girl closed the distance and shoved the key in the lock. I'm going to leave this unlocked, she said, looking over her shoulder at Anna. That way people can get in and get what they need as they need it. Anna nodded. Sounds like a good idea to me. The girl held out her hand. Victoria Cunningham. Vicky for short. Anna. No short version to that name. Don't really care for Han. A fleeting smile came and went from Vicky's lips. I'll be sure not to call you that. Here you go. She opened the door to the shed and stepped back. I'm going back in. You just get what you need for over there. Thank you, Vicky. We should be thanking you for your help. You're a stranger, aren't you? Anna nodded. I've just come for Daniel West. Oh, that's right. The girl nodded. Anna wondered if everyone in the entire town knew she was coming. They didn't seem bothered if they did. I'll just head back inside. If you need anything, let me know. Thanks again. Anna stepped into the small building, grateful for the sun shining through the two large windows on either side. She could see the labels on the boxes and bottles, and gathered as much as she could, finding a sack nearby to carry extra supplies in. A few moments later, she was hurrying back across the street to the community building, bracing herself. She wasn't squeamish about the sight of blood. It was knowing how many people were in pain that bothered her. She'd do whatever she could to help relieve them.
Chapter 18. Daniel pulled several broken boards from the front of a storefront, working with several other men who were doing the same thing. A big pile was beginning to form in the road, as people brought salvageable parts out that could be used in the repairs. Bradley. All the men turned when a woman called out the name. Daniel recognized Nicole Gowan, a widow who had two sons, Bradley and Andrew. Bradley was 5 years old. Andrew was 7 and trailing along behind his mother, looking confused and worried. Daniel looked at the men he was working with. I'll go help her. They nodded, and went back to their work as he ran out to where Nicole was in the middle of the road. Nicole. You can't find Bradley. Nicole shook her head, her face frantic. We were in the restaurant when it happened. We all ran out and I thought Bradley was right behind us. Daniel tilted his head to look behind the woman at the restaurant. The front windows were smashed out and the porch roof had fallen, he had to assume, after most of the customers escaped. He could see why Nicole was panicking. If Bradley hadn't come out with them, she couldn't just go back in and get him. The entrance had been blocked. Do you think he stayed inside? Nicole shook her head again, tears rolling down her cheeks. I don't know. I don't know why he didn't stay with us. Why would he run off? Daniel thought the more likely thing was that the child had hidden instead of running. He pictured the little boy inside the building, anxiety shooting through him. You stay here. I'll get him out. You can't do it by yourself, Nicole said, her voice strained. It's completely blocked. And what if he isn't in there? I'll get some men to help me, don't worry. Are you hurt at all? I just got hit on the head. I'm fine. Andrew is fine too. The little boy pushed himself against his mother's side, pressing his face into her skirt. Daniel looked at the blocked entrance again, moving his eyes around the area to see if there was anyone he could grab to help him. He patted Nicole on the arm. Go to the hotel, Nicole. Get Andrew something to drink and try to stay calm. We'll take care of this. You take care of Andrew. Please find him, Daniel. Please. He's just a little boy. The tears in her voice made his heart squeeze. I will. Go on now. Leave this to me. Nicole looked reluctantly back at the restaurant before she gently pulled Andrew off her skirt. Come, Andy. Come with Mama. Once she was heading for the hotel, which looked untouched by the devastation, Daniel turned and headed for the community building. If Bradley was still in the restaurant, he might need medical help. His plan was to see if Anna could come and help him search once the entrance was unblocked. On his way, he stopped several men who were piling up wood in the road and asked them to set about trying to open the entrance, which they immediately did. The community building was still bustling when Daniel went in. He spotted Anna immediately, kneeling next to someone who was lying on the ground. He went over to her and knelt too. She was talking to Thomas McAllister, Tom, one of the lumberjacks that worked out at the lumber mill. It looked strange to see the big man lying on the ground like that, looking helpless. How you doing, Tom? He asked. You gonna live? Tom and Anna both looked at him when he spoke. Anna looked relieved, which was gratifying. Tom managed to give Daniel a half grin. According to your lady here, I'm gonna, he replied. You did good, Daniel. She's a great gal. Daniel was delighted to hear the praise and smiled at Anna warmly. I need your help if I can tear you away from here for a minute. There's a missing boy, and he might need some medical attention when he's found. Missing boy. Anna immediately looked concerned. Who's missing? Tom asked, attempting to push himself up to a sitting position. Anna gently pushed his shoulder so he was lying down again. You can't get up yet. You'll open that wound and it will bleed again. That would not be good. You stay right there, Tom, Daniel added, silently wishing he could have the big man's help. He was strong and could pull down the barrier to the restaurant easier than any of the rest of them. I'm not having you come out and bleed out all over the place. We'll take care of it. At least tell me who it is, Tom said grumpily, dropping back to a prone position. Bradley Gowan. Well, go find the boy. Tom gestured with one hand. What are you waiting for? Anna and Daniel stood up, looking at each other. He was in the restaurant, Daniel said as they left the lumberjack behind. The front is blocked, and we'll have to break that down before we can get inside. Where is the boy's mother? Anna asked as they went down the steps of the community building and crossed the street to head toward the restaurant. I sent her to the hotel. It's the only place still standing, I think. More men had joined the ones Daniel had asked to help with the task, and he was pleasantly surprised to see much of the blockage was gone. While they continued tearing into the wreckage, he and Anna climbed carefully over what was still there. Daniel was in front of her. He kept his eyes on the floor to make sure he didn't step on a nail and cautioned Anna to do the same. The inside of the restaurant had gone dark. Daniel couldn't see much. He turned his head to look back at Anna, who was standing on several broken boards, holding herself in place with one of the poles that had been holding up the roof and was still standing, though the roof was no longer attached. "Get me a lantern," he said, and then added, "Please." Anna nodded, turned, and ran to the clinic a few doors down. She reappeared just moments later with a lit lantern in hand. She hurried back to him, climbing over the rubble. "Be careful," Daniel warned her, holding out his hand to take the lantern. He turned back with the lantern and held it through the opening that had been made. He stepped slowly over the debris on the floor, entering the quiet building. He could hear rocks falling and cracking of wood as Anna climbed in behind him. "Bradley," he called out, swinging the lantern in a circle around him. A long crack in the middle of the floor looked devastating. The foundation would be ruined. Turning his thoughts away from that, Daniel called out for the boy once again. "Bradley. Where are you, boy? Don't be afraid. We're here to help you." Both of them fell quiet, waiting to hear something, anything, that might indicate the boy was alive and well. They heard nothing but the sounds of people outside working, yelling to each other, and hammers breaking down stuck pieces. Anna looked at Daniel. He turned the lantern up high so they could see around them. He held it up and turned in a slow circle. There was a set of stairs going up to the second floor, where several spare rooms were occasionally rented out by travelers. "You don't think he went up there, do you?" Every piece of furniture in the place was toppled over. Glasses, plates, and utensils were scattered on the floor. Pictures that had been hanging up had fallen and smashed to bits. Glass shards glinted in the lantern light. "Be careful where you walk," he said before turning his eyes back up to the stairs. "I don't know why he would. But I don't think he's down here. He would say something if he was." "Does he know you?" she asked. "He does," Daniel replied with a nod. "Bradley. Call out to me if you hear me." They stayed silent and still for a moment. Daniel didn't hear anything. But the look on Anna's face told him she might have. He narrowed his eyes. "Did you hear him?" "I don't know," Anna responded slowly. I thought I heard a far-off cry of a child. But it could be my imagination. Or you could be hearing him from his hiding place." "But why wouldn't he just come out if he hears us?" she asked. His face was worried. He might be scared. Or maybe he can't. Maybe he's trapped. "Bradley." He was louder that time. "Bradley. Are you there?" Once again they stood stock still, listening. This time Daniel thought he heard the sound of the child calling from somewhere. "Can you come out?" Daniel asked. "We can barely hear you. We don't know where you are." The boy's voice drifted through the air toward them, but Daniel couldn't decipher the words. He turned a frantic face to Anna. "He's here somewhere." Anna nodded. "Yes, he is. And I think he is upstairs. He's probably afraid to come down them because of another earthquake. He must be terrified. Come on. Let's see if we can safely make it up the stairs. We're coming, Bradley. You hold on there, buddy."
Chapter 19. You two see him yet? Anna and Daniel turned when a man called to them from the entrance, which was about halfway unblocked at that point. "We're going up the stairs, Paul," Daniel called to him. "Think that's where he ran." For the life of her, Anna couldn't figure out why the boy would run upstairs, why he hadn't stayed stuck to his mother. Her heart hurt with anxiety for him. She prayed he wasn't too hurt. "We'll keep doing this. You need help, you yell." "Thanks, Paul." Daniel looked at her. "We have to be real careful on these steps. They might collapse." "Why do you think he ran up the stairs?" she asked quietly, stepping carefully over the mess on the floor, gently kicking items to the side to make a path. They arrived at the stairs and looked up with trepidation. Daniel held the lantern higher and appeared to be examining the stability of the steps. He reached over and pushed on the side railing, but it didn't move. "Okay, just hold on to the railing," he said before continuing. I reckon when the entrance was blocked, the windows had smashed out, and the debris started raining down all around him, he figured the place to go was up. Anna didn't understand the logic of that, but then she wasn't 5 years old. She waited with an anxious heart while Daniel tested the first steps. There were 3 facing the wall before a small landing, and a turn to the right to go up the rest of them. He was up on the landing a few seconds later, nodding back at her. Feels like the steps are about to fall. I don't feel steady at all. Be careful. More aftershocks were in the back of Anna's mind, but she tried not to let it scare her. The 2 slowly went up. They were halfway up when a creaking sound made them both stop short. Anna looked up at the back of Daniel's head with wide eyes, her heart pounding. Daniel? She said his name quietly as if her voice might make the stairs collapse beneath them. Just wait a minute, Daniel said in an equally hushed voice. Anna swallowed and waited. Daniel took another step up. The creaking came again, and Anna felt the railing in her hand move slightly. A loud crack came from above them, and Daniel lifted the lantern. They both saw the top of the stairs where it met the landing had broken in half. The side with the railing had only a giant hole where the top 5 steps had been. The other side was still solid, but there was no railing. Oh my, Anna said. If he came up here, no wonder he didn't come back down. He must be terrified. Bradley, Daniel called out. Are you up there, buddy? We're coming up if you are. Call to me, little man. Are you there? Help me. The sound of the child's voice covered Anna in chills. Daniel spun around and looked at her sharply. He turned back around and called up the steps, We're coming. You just hang on. How about you tell me one of your nursery rhymes so I can find you? Can you do that? You know any stories you can tell me? The boy began to cry. I want my mama, he said through his tears. I want my mama. I'm scared. Anna's heart melted. She tried to keep the tears from her own eyes. She needed to see clearly in this mess. Bradley? My name is Anna. I'm gonna take you to your mama. Me and Daniel, we're gonna take you to her, all right? You have to be brave right now, though. You have to talk to us so we can find you. The little boy was quiet for a moment before he started to sing a melody his mother must have taught him. It was about a cowboy on the prairie. The cowboy's name happened to be Bradley. He was a hero and saved many people. As they listened to the song, the 2 made their way carefully up the remaining steps. When they reached the hole and were forced to use what was left of the stairs on the left side, they moved more slowly. Careful. Careful. Daniel kept repeating the word, stepping over 2 at a time so he could reach the landing sooner. Once he was there, he turned around and held his hand out to her. She took it, and he vaulted her up to stand beside him. Her whole body was tense from the entire ordeal. Now we find him, Daniel said quietly, looking directly at her. And try to get him safely out of here. She nodded. Bradley? Daniel used a more cordial tone, not quite as loud and panicked. Can you come out? We're at the top of the stairs. Come on out, buddy. The singing halted, and they heard a shuffling sound in one of the rooms down the hall. There were 4 rooms, 2 on either side of the stairs. The doors to the rooms were opposite of each other. The window at the end of the hallway to their right was smashed through with a large tree that had fallen outside. The branches were hanging through the window, and the floor was covered in leaves. All 4 doors to the rooms were open. The candle sconces and paintings on the walls had fallen to the ground. I can't. Bradley's wailing voice came from the rooms to the left where the tree had come in through the window. I'm stuck. We're coming. Daniel and Anna hurried to look in the rooms, Anna taking the one to the right and Daniel to the left. He spun around after glancing in the room. He's in here, I'll bet. Bradley. Talk to me. I'm here. Anna couldn't believe what she was seeing when she peeked over Daniel's shoulder into the room where the boy was. The tree that had stuck its branches in the hallway window had taken down half the room. The wall was missing, and in its place was a huge tree mixing with the rubble from the building it had decimated. Where are you? Are you hurt? I'm bleeding, Bradley replied. His words made Anna concerned. Where are you bleeding from? Anna moved with Daniel, as close as they could get to the wreckage in front of them. She examined the branches, the wood from the building itself, the broken furniture pieces all over the floor. She could hear Bradley but could not see him. Daniel moved around the tree and leaned forward, using his hands to balance himself as he peered through it all. Bradley? You there? Say something. I'm here, his voice came through again, sounding like he was in a deep hole. Daniel looked behind him at her. I think I see him. That dresser got shoved out and then back somehow. I think it has him pinned to wall there, or what's left of the wall. How are we going to get him out? Anna asked. Daniel pushed himself off the huge tree limbs and stepped back, looking contemplatively at the scene. Bradley, are you hurting very bad? Are you bleeding very bad? I might be. I need a bandage. My mama would have a bandage. Daniel nodded. Oh, I'm sure she would. But we can get you one too. Where are you hurt? Can you tell me that? Bradley was quiet. What hurts, honey? Anna asked, trying to sound motherly, though she wasn't sure what that sounded like. My leg. My leg hurts. Is that what's bleeding? Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to get you out of there, so you just sit tight and try to relax, okay? Okay, the boy replied. A few seconds later, they could hear him humming shakily the same tune he'd been singing to let them know where he was. They stepped back from the tree until they were at the entrance to the room again. What are we going to do? Anna whispered. We need axes to cut that thing down, and it could accidentally kill him in the process. The tree, I mean. What if it shifts its weight? Daniel lifted one finger and put it in front of his lips. Don't talk like that, he whispered. He can probably hear you. He's a sharp kid. He'll do what he needs to do to get him out of this. We need more men, don't we? I don't think those stairs are going to handle a lot of traffic, Daniel responded. We've got to do this ourselves. I don't see how. The tree is holding that dresser against him, pinning him to the wall. We can't get to him without cutting the limbs away. It's not like we can go outside and move the tree away. Anna looked at the scene, thinking how impossible it looked. She knew Daniel wouldn't leave the boy where he was. But for the life of her, she didn't know what they could do to make things right.
Chapter 20. Daniel surveyed the scene once more and made a decision. The tree had brought down half the room, opening it up to the outside. He turned and took Anna's hand. Come on. He pulled her out into the hallway and to the stairs. He turned and said in a low voice, I need you to do something for me. Of course. What is it? I need you to go back in there and talk to him, and keep him calm. What are you going to do? Daniel clenched his jaw before he said, I'm going to climb up from the outside and take him out that way. Anna looked confused, her eyebrows drawing together. What do you mean, take him out that way? Over the fallen tree. I don't see why not. It's the only way he can get out. I noticed there's enough space for him to crawl through. At least, I'm hoping so. He might have to suck in that gut of his. Anna appreciated the injection of humor and gave a short laugh. It won't be that bad, I promise. You just stay in there and talk to him. I'll come around from the outside. Should I tell him what you're doing? He doesn't need to know. I don't even know if he would understand, despite how smart he is. Okay, well, go and be careful on these darn stairs. Daniel nodded. Out of the blue, he leaned over and kissed her cheek, squeezing her shoulder at the same time. You be careful too. Don't let a tree fall on you. She let out a small laugh and watched him move carefully down the stairs. Once he was past the great hole and the creaking wasn't as severe, she turned back to return to the room where Bradley was being held hostage by an enormous tree and its branches. Daniel was at the bottom of the steps before he looked back up to see Anna was gone. Every new moment with her made him think how lucky he'd been, she was the one to come to Utah. If it had been any other girl from the East, they'd probably have been too overwhelmed by everything that had happened. But not Anna Dawson. She was resilient and strong. He was proud he'd chosen her to come and marry him. He dashed to the entrance, which was still being unblocked, and jumped over the remaining rubble. The men working the cleanup stared at him, anxious for news. "He's upstairs," Daniel explained. All the men turned their eyes up to the second floor. "I'm gonna make sure he gets out. I need some men to come with me around back. A big tree took down half the room up there. He's trapped against the outside wall. What's your plan, Daniel?" As he spoke, he went over the rubble and between them, heading for the side of the building. Several of them followed behind him. "The way he's trapped," he explained as he hurried. "I think I can climb up there on the tree and maybe get him out that way." "Hey, what little boy doesn't like to climb trees?" one of the men following him called out. Daniel nodded, stopping the moment he rounded the building to the back, taking in the scene where the tree had penetrated the side of the house. It looked like the earth had spit it out. The roots were above ground, twisting up into the air on one side. He ran his eyes along the tree. It had plenty of branches. He had a feeling he could climb it with some ease. Calling on the days of his youth, Daniel grabbed hold of one of the branches closest to him and pulled himself up. He moved as precisely as he could, confident the big tree wasn't going anywhere under his puny weight. He climbed like a monkey, moving in and out of tree limbs, reaching the building after only a few minutes. He could see where the wall began, and estimated Bradley to be on the other side of it, closest to the hole the tree had made. "Bradley," he called out. "I'm outside. Can you hear my voice?" "I hear you," Bradley replied loudly. Daniel could hear the nervousness in his voice, and tried to make sure he sounded as confident as possible. "I want you to come to the sound of my voice. Go toward the edge of the house. There's a hole where you can crawl out and I'll grab onto you." "I'll fall," the boy wailed. Daniel pictured the child pressed up against the wall, fearful to move an inch. "I won't let that happen," he insisted. He grabbed hold of a thick branch with one hand and leaned forward, placing his foot securely on another branch below him. He reached in the hole and waved his hand. "Do you see my hand? Do you see it?" "I see it," Bradley replied. "Take hold of my hand. I won't let you fall. Come on out." He waited with an anxious heart, hoping the boy would take his hand soon so he didn't tire out from the position he was in. He felt the touch of the boy's small hand, and then Bradley clutched onto him. Daniel pulled the boy until he was out of the hole. Bradley looked down with wide eyes, grabbing onto Daniel hard and almost knocking them both off balance. The boy wrapped his arms around Daniel's neck, crying from fear. Daniel tried to ignore the fact that he was being choked. "Climb around, boy," he said gently. "Get on my back and hold on." Bradley did as he was told, climbing like a monkey to get around to hang from Daniel's neck. Daniel could see the men below, watching as he slowly came back down the tree. Once they were on the ground, a cheer rose up from the crowd that had gathered to watch. "Come on, Bradley." A woman Daniel recognized as Nicole's sister ran up to the boy and scooped him up. "I'll take you to your mama." Daniel watched her skitter off with the boy in tow, before turning to see Anna step out over the debris left in front of the entrance. Their eyes met and they both smiled. "You got him out safely," Anna exclaimed, looking past him to where the woman and child were jogging toward the hotel. "Yes, that was a blessing. I hope no one else is trapped under the rubble. I don't think I've heard of anyone being lost except—" He hesitated, his heart pounding at the thought of the loss of his pastor friend. "I think that was wonderful, Daniel." Anna wrapped her arms around his neck. He wasn't surprised that it was a much more wonderful feeling than being choked by a panicked 5-year-old. He hugged her back. Before they pulled apart, she lifted up on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek. "So much for your first day in Utah," he said, looking behind him and then back into her eyes. He was glad she was there to share the experience with them, even though it was a tragic event. "There's nothing you can do when God acts," Anna said. "The earth must have needed shifting. Just wish he'd warn us first." They both chuckled. I'm going back to the community building, Anna said. You've got to be getting hungry. You can't have eaten in a long time. I'll be fine, Anna said, shaking her head. We need to make sure everyone is safe before we do anything else. I'm not going to starve to death after only a few hours. I'll tell you what. You go back to the community building and help them there. As he spoke, he brushed the strands of her hair that had come out from under her bonnet away from her face. I'm going to see if anyone else needs my help. When I'm satisfied I've done all I can do for now, I'll come get you. If you start feeling tired, you come get me too, Anna replied. You have to watch out for yourself too. You've already done so much and you need nutrition just like me. Nutrition and rest. Those things will happen as soon as everyone is recovered and safe. Anna nodded. I understand. Come and get me whenever you want. The way she was gazing at him made him feel strange inside. His stomach felt like butterflies had erupted inside it. She truly was a beautiful woman, even with dirt and ash smudged on her face and all over her dress. She was about as dirty as she could get for a woman of class and distinction. His thoughts made him smile. He whipped out the kerchief from his back pocket and wiped at the smudges on her face. She giggled, catching his hand and pressing the cloth against her face. You go now. I'll be all right. Time to clean up later, right? Daniel sighed. You're really an amazing woman, Anna. She shook her head. I don't think so. You are. She grinned. If you insist. I'm just doing what anyone would do if they had the knowledge I have. Not everyone would have the courage to do it, though. I'm proud to have brought you here. I'll have to take at least that credit. She laughed. Okay, Daniel. Good job bringing me here. I'll be over there, she pointed, if you need me. He watched her cross the road to the community building, waving at him before she went in. His chest swelled with pride when he saw her immediately stop and take a knee beside a child speaking to him.
Chapter 21. The lanterns were burning low in the makeshift clinic. Anna was sitting on a big cushion she'd found and dropped on the floor by the wall. She had her back to the wall, her legs stretched out in front of her and her ankles crossed. Someone had brought her a canteen filled with fresh water from the stream. She took a sip, her eyes roaming around the room, listening to the soft breathing of the people whose wounds she'd helped treat. Most of them had been able to leave, but some had nowhere to go, as their homes had been destroyed or were no longer inhabitable. It was more people than Anna would have liked to see. But she was certain the townspeople would help each other out, however they could. The door opened, and Daniel came in, the light from the lantern he was holding illuminating his face. His eyes immediately landed on Anna, and lit up. He crossed the room, and lowered himself to the cushion to sit facing her. Anna. You look exhausted. She nodded. I feel exhausted. I might just lay down right here. I don't know if they'll need me in the middle of the night or not. I think we've found the extent of the injuries. Is there anyone left unaccounted for? She was pleased to see him shake his head. No, he said. We're not missing anyone. And the pastor is the only one who died, though plenty of people have been injured. He said the words with a matter-of-fact tone, running his eyes over the people lying about in the room. He turned his eyes back to gaze warmly at her. You've been going since you got here, Anna. You still haven't eaten. I know you're tired. Come with me. You've done all you can do for tonight. But someone here might need me. I think it was you who said I needed to make sure I am getting nutrition and sleep, right? He asked, bringing her words back to her. She grinned. I did say that, didn't I? He nodded. And what makes you exempt from that policy? You are just as important. You're more than important. I'll get you a room at the hotel, and we'll stay in town in case we're needed. I know the light of day tomorrow will bring out how destructive it all really was. Do you think that will happen again? She asked the question knowing he couldn't answer it. There was no way to predict an earthquake. From all she'd read, they simply happened. There was no warning signal, no way to prepare. I don't know, Anna. I hope not. It's been an awful long time since the last one. I was just a kid. He pushed himself to his feet and held his hand out to her. Come with me. Let's go get something to eat. I'll make you a sandwich to get you through the night, and make a big breakfast for you in the morning. The hotel is in perfect condition? She asked as she took his hand and pulled herself to her feet. It's in the same condition it was before the quake, with maybe some missing pictures that fell or knickknacks that were smashed. The foundation and the building is still standing, as if there had been no earthquake at all. That's amazing. It skipped right over it. The two walked out into the crisp night air side by side. Anna was pleased when he took her hand. His was so warm, like the sound of his voice when he spoke to her. The tall lamps that lined the side of the road made it perfectly clear the earthquake hadn't bothered with the hotel. It was the only building that didn't have any damage to it. I don't understand it, she said. But I suppose God knows what he's doing. Daniel nodded. I just wish the church hadn't burned down. That's going to be hard to replace. Maybe you should consider building a new church somewhere else, instead of in the same place. He looked at her, confused. Why would I want to do that? She shrugged. Less painful memories. Make new memories of your own. It's not always good to hold on to the past. It can weigh you down. Daniel looked thoughtful. I reckon I could mention it to the others. It's not really my decision. We'll have a town meeting to discuss it. I'll be paying for it though, I'm sure. They arrived at the hotel, and Daniel pushed the door open for her. She looked around once inside. The furniture had probably been knocked over, and she saw 2 pictures hanging on the wall, with many other spaces that looked like something had been hanging there the day before. Everything had been righted, however, and cleaned up. To their right was the waiting room lobby, which held 2 couches facing each other, one against the outside wall under the broken windows. There were matching end tables and lamps beside the couches. She heard a loud snoring to her left and turned her head to see a rotund man laying back in a chair, his legs stretched out, his head back, his fingers laced together over his large stomach. He snorted loudly again, breathing in, and then let the air out through an O he formed with his lips. Should we wake him? Anna asked Daniel. He glanced at the man and shook his head. It's late. He knows who I am. Let me see if there's a bed left for you. Does he have any lodgers right now? Daniel smiled at her and whispered his response. I don't know anything about his business, my dear. She gave him a snide look that turned into a little smile. I would think someone like you would know if someone new were in town. Daniel's eyebrows shot up. Why would you think that? You just seem like that type. Don't you have the most money in Boone's Gulch? He looked like he didn't know where she was going with her line of thinking. To spare him and herself any more humiliation, she stated clearly, You are the kind of man who will put everything you have into something you're passionate about. I wouldn't be at all surprised if you set up everything with your own money, and we had a new church in no time. Daniel sighed but nodded. He went around the desk the man was sleeping at, and straight to a slotted cupboard behind it. There were 3 keys, indicating the other 6 rooms had been taken. He needed to get some shut-eye too, but not just yet. Come to the kitchen, he whispered, taking her hand again after pulling out one of the keys. They went to a side door silently. He pushed it open and let her go through before him. The kitchen looked as modern as it could be to Anna. The pot-bellied stove looked new, and a tall icebox sat in the corner. A table that could fit 14 was stood in the middle of the room. Sit down anywhere, Daniel whispered. I'll make you a quick sandwich and some coffee. No coffee, she said quickly, shaking her head. That will make me shake. I'm too tired for it. I'll take anything else you have here. Well, it's not my place. But I do know where they keep everything. Daniel pulled out a chair for her nearest the kitchen area, and headed to the bread box first. Anna watched him as he maneuvered the kitchen, preparing what looked to be a veritable feast to her, but was merely 2 pieces of sliced bread with ham and cheese slices in between. She asked him to put a little mayonnaise on it too. "Is there anything else I can get for you?" Daniel asked, setting it down in front of her. The sandwich was huge and looked delicious but also exhausting. Anna didn't know how much longer she could keep her eyes open. Her body had gone through more that day than she'd had to, in a very long time. If ever. She'd never lived through a natural disaster before. Daniel prepared a sandwich for himself and sat across from her, with 2 glasses of tea that he'd poured for them. "Here you go. Drink up. Eat up. I'll put you to bed and you'll rest up. We'll start the day anew tomorrow." She took a bite of her sandwich. It was only 20 minutes later, but Anna had lost her fight to stay awake. Once the sustenance and tea hit her stomach, she dropped off like the sun setting. She felt Daniel's arms around her, guiding her, practically carrying her to the stairs that went to the 2nd floor. She slid between the sheets of the bed Daniel took her to, and was asleep moments after her head hit the pillow. Chapter 22. A knock on the door wakened Anna the next morning. She rolled over and looked around, trying to remember where she was. "Anna?" A woman's voice came from the other side of the door. She put one hand to her forehead and tried to clear her thoughts. "I'm here," she said, and then, "Come in. Come in." The door opened and Emma came through, smiling. "There you are. You're a hero, you know? You helped a lot of people." She crossed the room energetically, a bounce in her step. Anna was still half asleep, and didn't quite grasp what Emma was saying. The young lady sat on the edge of the bed so hard she bounced. "Daniel is so proud." Anna cleared her throat and squeezed her eyes shut. "He's proud?" She shook her head, clearing it, coming into focus. "I didn't do anything. That little boy." "Oh, he's getting the praise he deserves for that one," Emma remarked in an off-handed manner, rolling her eyes, a pleasant look on her slender face. "That's how Daniel is, though. He doesn't mind basking in the glory of himself sometimes, but he preferred the spotlight be elsewhere. That's just the way he is." She grabbed Anna's hand and squeezed it. "I'm glad you're here too. I think we will be the best of friends. At least I hope we will. You seem like a delight to me." Anna wondered how Emma had come to that conclusion when the 2 of them hadn't spent any time together at all, and Anna had been in Boone's Gulch for just 1 full day and night. She smiled anyway, appreciating Emma's goodwill and sentiment. "I hope we will too," she said. "I must get dressed. I'm sure there's still plenty to do." "Yes, there is, I'm afraid. Many people will need our help." "You have your house to worry about too," Anna mentioned, shaking her head. Emma stood up, pulling Anna out of the bed to her feet. "We don't have to worry about anything like that," she said with a dismissive tone. "Mr. Lancaster will take care of it all. That's our lawyer, you see. Henry Lancaster. He takes care of everything. I'm sure he'll take care of this." Anna didn't know enough about any of it to argue. If the Wests weren't worried about how to build their house or how much it would cost, why should it make a difference to her? "Daniel had your bags brought up so you'd be able to refresh yourself after everything that happened. There's a room with a tub next to this one, and fresh water can be added to it for you if you'd like." "I don't know if I should take that kind of time," Anna said, finally becoming alert, stretching her arms up over her head. "I'm sure there's lots of work to do." Emma laughed softly. "Oh, Anna. That is very true, there is a lot of work to do. But you'll find here in Boone's Gulch that we don't move at a very rapid pace. The cleanup will go on until it's done. And we'll all just keep plugging away. We're not in a rush. We're all in it together, you know?" Anna liked the sound of that. She nodded. "I think I smell breakfast stuff, don't I?" "I know Daniel wanted to make you breakfast," Emma said. "But once everyone found out he was here, they all came in asking him to make one for them." She giggled. "Sometimes I think Daniel doesn't realize how much people take advantage of his good nature. Maybe he doesn't consider it taking advantage. Not as an insult anyway." He provides the opportunity, and he provides the skill. It sounds right to me. Emma scanned her face with a thoughtful expression. You're a good woman, I believe, she said. You'll fit in well with me and my sisters. We don't tease Daniel a lot. That's not our way. But we do like to keep him in line. Anna laughed, wondering what keeping Daniel in line actually meant. I'll leave you to get cleaned up and dressed. Please don't rush. You can take your time. I know Daniel is anxious to see you though. So you might keep that in mind. But he's not going anywhere, and neither is all that debris outside. Try to relax. Daniel is upset your first day turned out to be so stressful and dangerous. It's not his fault. I wish he wouldn't be upset. You tell him that when you come out then, Emma responded, a smile flashing from her lips and sparkling in her eyes. I'm sure he'd rather hear it from you than anyone else. Anna nodded. All right, let me get washed up and I'll be right down. Before she turned away, Emma reached out and took some of Anna's hair in her fingers. I'll do your hair in a French braid if you want. Just let me know. You're very pretty. I'm glad you are here for Daniel. Anna blushed as Emma turned and left, unaware she'd just touched Anna's heart. It would be 20 minutes before she went down the steps. She'd chosen to wear a dress that would allow her easy movement to climb and move, and that she didn't mind getting dirty. It was still pretty, but it wasn't one of the nicest. She wanted to impress Daniel, but overdressing for a day of dirty work didn't seem logical. Daniel was not alone in the kitchen. Emma was still there, chatting with 2 other people her age, each of them with their own mug of coffee. She looked up and grinned when she saw Anna, waving at her. Anna waved back. Daniel turned from the stove where he was flipping eggs in a pan and saw her. His face lit up, and he handed the spatula to the man beside him, who gave him a confused glance at first. When he followed Daniel's gaze and saw Anna though, he smiled and said something to Daniel that Anna couldn't hear. Daniel nodded, spoke back to the man and crossed to where Anna was. The murmuring in the room from the other guests was like a comfortable hum to Anna. Here you are. You are looking lovely today. Not too sore from yesterday, I hope? Anna hadn't really thought about it. She was fairly surprised that all the work she'd done hadn't made her stiff as a log. No. I guess I took it easy yesterday, without even realizing it. Daniel chuckled. If you say so. I knew you were strong. How about you? How are you feeling? I'm fine. Not a thing wrong with me. He lifted one arm. Except this arm. I think I might have a deep bruise from that beam of wood that fell over me late last night. Anna's eyebrows drew together. Oh dear. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you okay? You know I could have treated that. Daniel shook his head with a short laugh. No, it's just a bruise, darling. I didn't break anything. Just pulled something maybe. Let's sit down and talk. I'll get you a plate. Are you hungry? You've got to be hungry. I'm famished, Anna said, nodding, placing one hand over her stomach. There were 2 chairs on the other side of Emma from her friends, and Anna took one of them. After making sure she was comfortable in her seat, Daniel returned to the kitchen to make them both plates. Good morning again, Anna, Emma greeted her. Are you feeling better now? I feel fine, Anna said, smiling, moving her eyes from the young woman to her 2 friends. I wasn't hurt. Just tired, that's all. I didn't think I was going to sleep last night, said the girl who was with Emma. I kept waiting for more to come, for the earth to roll again. She shivered. This is Pauline, Anna. And her brother, Robert. Nice to meet you both, Anna said to both of them. This is Anna, Emily said, holding her hand out in Anna's direction. Robert's eyes shot up. So you're the one who helped rescue Bradley then? She helped a lot more people than just Bradley, Emma gushed. I think half the town owes her for their lives. Anna shook her head. No. Don't heap that kind of credit on me. I bandaged up wounds and talked to people, and yes, I helped with Bradley, but I'm not a hero. I remember you saying that earlier. Anna didn't want to be regarded as a hero. If anyone deserved that status, it was Daniel. "If you want a hero, talk about Daniel," she said, happy to steer the attention in his direction. "He's the one who saved Bradley. He climbed the fallen tree. I just sat inside and talked to him." "What did you say?" The group looked up when Daniel came over to the table and set down a plate in front of Anna. He sat with his own and gave them all curious looks. "What did I say?" At first, Anna was confused. It was a struggle to even remember what she'd said. But the words came back to her gradually as she recounted the incident. "Yeah, I'm just curious," Daniel replied. "What did you say to keep him calm?" "Nothing special," Anna replied. "Just that I wasn't going to leave him, and if God was on our side, he would get out safe." She stopped and laughed abruptly. "He wanted me to tell God that he was thankful afterward. It was so cute." "You'll have to add him to your prayers every night, Emma," Pauline said. "You're right. I think we all should."
Chapter 23. "Sounds like you handled it perfectly then," Daniel said, gazing at her before popping half a biscuit in his mouth and chewing. He'd risen earlier than Anna, mostly because he couldn't sleep. He'd taken one of the other beds in the spare rooms, but tossed and turned for hours. It was 2 a.m. before he fell asleep, and when he woke at 7, he felt as well rested as if he'd had 24 hours of sleep. He was that alert. Some of the men had worked through the night, so when he stepped outside to see what progress had been made, it almost looked like there'd been a massacre. Men were lying on the ground, sitting up with their heads down and hats pulled over their faces, or stretched out in chairs in a variety of poses, some looking comfortable, some not. They were all asleep though, and the men who had gotten up early like Daniel were wandering around quietly, tossing debris into the small bonfires that dotted the main road. He'd gone back inside and started breakfast, beginning with a fresh pot of coffee and a separate one for tea. It didn't take long for people to start drifting in. The people who had taken rooms were the first ones he'd noticed. He was pleasantly surprised when his sisters came in and greeted him warmly. Emma was the only one who had stayed with him. Rose and Amelia were anxious to see their friends and make sure everyone was okay. Daniel was surprised he wasn't worn out. He felt like he'd had plenty of sleep, especially after Anna came down. "This is a wonderful breakfast, Daniel, thank you so much." Anna gave him an approving look that warmed his heart. "You're welcome. I didn't know I was very hungry until I started eating. I'm trying not to eat it too fast." She giggled, covering her mouth with her fingers in a way that pulled on his heartstrings. "I really wish your arrival here hadn't been marred by this, Anna," he said, staring down at the eggs on his plate, pushing them around with a fork. "If I'd known, I wouldn't have had you come so quickly." She shook her head. When she spoke to him, Emma and her friends started their own conversation, leaving the two of them to talk. "I didn't want to wait," she said, lowering her voice so only he could hear her. "Like I said yesterday, this certainly wasn't your fault. I know you wouldn't have wished this on me. It is what it is. I had to leave Lerner and I'm glad I did. Another day in that place and I might have pulled out all my hair." Daniel lifted his eyebrows, curiously. "Was it that bad?" "Oh yes," Anna said vehemently. He could see her getting fired up, and it made him even more attracted to her. Those girls were so awful to me afterward. They didn't turn my best friend against me though. She tried to stick by me. I hope they didn't bother her after I left. They would need a new target." "Did you know they thought badly of you?" Daniel asked, picking up his mug of coffee and taking a sip. "No, that's the thing. They all came to my party before the wedding. He didn't tell me until the day of the wedding. How cruel can someone be?" The feeling Daniel had when Anna originally told him what happened to her was back. He held in the rage, listening to the hurt in Anna's voice and not being able to do anything to help. "The worst thing about it was that I had come to depend on him financially. My family had no money. I had been receiving an allowance from him." "Really?" It was more of a statement than a question. Daniel kept eating, hoping she would continue. He thought it would be good for her to get it all out in the open. He debated telling her how much it enraged him that this Sean character had done something so monstrous to someone as delicate as Anna. But the more he thought about it, the more he shied away from the idea. He couldn't be sure how she would react. Either way, he felt it was better to keep those feelings to himself until they knew each other better. That way she would know that no matter what, he wasn't a dangerous man. Yes. Really. I hate to even think about it now. At the time, I thought it was going to be that way for the rest of my life. I thought I was in love with him. Daniel raised his eyebrows. Are you still? He asked softly. No. The quickness with which she answered made Daniel feel better. I have no feelings like that left for him. I am devastated because I was such a fool. I should never have put all my trust in that man. Did he ever give you a reason not to? Daniel asked. She blinked at him. What? Daniel set his coffee down and rested one hand on hers. Did he ever do anything to make you doubt him? That he felt a different way than what he was saying? Anna dropped her eyes to the table. I don't believe so, no. Daniel put 2 fingers under her chin and lifted her face so she was looking at him. Then it wasn't you. It was him. He was the one who was playing about and fooling with your heart. He's the scoundrel here. You're not bad or wrong for anything you've done or said. Anna pulled in a deep breath. I still feel so bad, she said. Like I should have known. I shouldn't have been so gullible. Daniel patted her hand. You weren't gullible. You trusted him. That's good. I need you to trust me. I hope you won't take from that experience with him and feel like you can't trust me. Anna shook her head. You are not Sean. I may have only been here for a day now, but everything you did yesterday showed you are not like him. I don't believe he would have climbed that tree and rescued Bradley. He would have paid someone else to do it for him and taken the credit. Daniel raised his eyebrows. Is he in politics? Anna laughed. No, but he'd probably be quite good at that profession. He can talk a good line and fool people easily. Well, you're not there anymore. You're here now. With me. And my sisters. And we're going to take care of you, and no one is going to make fun of you or drop you at the altar. Can I ask you something? Daniel gave her a curious look. Of course. Why didn't you just get one of the girls here to marry you? I've seen a few our age and no one seems to be objectionable or unfriendly. Wasn't there anyone here for you already? She hurried to add, not that I'm unhappy about coming here. I'm glad you put in the ad. I'm just curious why when there seem to be good ladies here, and you're not a bad guy yourself. Daniel grinned at her last sentence. I'll take that as a compliment. I'll tell you why he didn't, Pauline got their attention by speaking up. Both turned to look at her. She was smiling, moving her gaze between Daniel and Anna. A shot of adrenaline made Daniel nervous for a moment. He had no idea what the young woman was about to say. His reputation in Boone's Gulch was good though. He wasn't too worried. Tell her then, he said in a daring voice, waving one hand toward Pauline. Pauline rested her eyes on Anna, sitting forward and folding her arms on the edge of the table. He has 3 sisters. He's treated all of us like sisters since we were in the schoolhouse. We don't get many visitors or travelers, especially not young ladies our age. He couldn't get a woman from here because we're basically all his sisters. Light laughter lifted from the small group. Daniel was washed over with affection for them all. You know, Pauline, I think you may have hit that nail right on the head. Pauline had a look of pleasant satisfaction on her face. I know I did, Daniel. There's not a thing wrong with you outside, and I don't believe you have any major flaws on the inside. This made the laughter return while she continued. So if it hadn't been for you treating us all like sisters for the last decade or more, maybe one of us would have fallen in love with you. I'm glad you didn't, Anna announced over the laughter. She gave Daniel a big smile, and he grinned back. So am I, Anna. He leaned over instinctively and kissed her cheek. So am I.
Chapter 24. The sun was shining the day of Pastor John's funeral. 2 weeks had passed since the devastating earthquake that took his life. They'd had to wait longer than normal to bury him because of the constant work being done to put the town back together. In addition, they had to wait for a replacement pastor to come and do the services. Anna woke up that morning with an anxious heart. She knew what day it was. It wasn't just the day of the funeral. It was Daniel's birthday. Through the last 2 weeks, he'd been telling her they would have to wait until the replacement pastor came to Boone's Gulch. If at all possible, they would get married sometime during the day. The work at the West home was going along rapidly, with many helpers from town. Daniel had discussed it with the other men in town, and they'd all decided the easiest way to get it done quickly was to work in groups taking care of one house per group. Anna knew little about the coordination they were using, or how the finances fit in with the work. She went where she was told and did what they asked, which was mostly checking in on those who had been injured during the quake. No one else had died from their injuries, but some had come close. Their wounds still needed cleaning and redressing on a regular basis. There were 3 broken legs and a broken wrist. Many cuts and bruises that were on their way to healing, if not already back to normal. Anna didn't mind checking in on the people, even if their injuries had been minimal. It was helping her get to know the people in the town a lot faster than she would have if the disaster hadn't happened. She tried to think of that as a silver lining. It didn't bother her that her arrival coordinated with the earthquake like Daniel thought it might. When she thought about it later, she figured it had helped to break the awkwardness both of them had felt. They'd worked together well, without having ever been partners before. She left the house in the buggy with Daniel and his sisters, heading for the cemetery. The ride was a quiet one, though Anna desperately wanted to ask Daniel about it being his birthday. He hadn't mentioned it all morning, and she worried that if she brought it up, it might bother him. Daniel pulled the horses over into the grass, near where the body of Pastor John would be lowered into the ground. He jumped down and helped Emma down, who was sitting directly behind him. Rose came after her, taking Daniel's hand and hopping out of the buggy. He rounded the vehicle and helped Amelia down first before coming up to Anna. She looked down at him, noting the sisters were already walking to the gravesite. She took his hand and stepped out of the buggy, but prevented him from turning to follow his sisters. "Daniel," she said, anxiety evident in her quiet voice. When he looked at her, she pressed her lips together and raised her eyebrows. She wanted him to know what she was asking without her having to voice it. She didn't want him bothered or upset. It was bad enough they were there to bury Pastor John, whom he'd been so close to. It turned out, she didn't have to be the one to do it. Henry Lancaster suddenly appeared behind Daniel. "Daniel," he said, "we need to talk. You know what it's about." Daniel turned around, taking a step back so he wasn't in between Henry and Anna. "Anna, you know our lawyer Henry Lancaster, don't you?" Anna smiled at the man nervously. "We've met, yes," she said. "You have to do it today, Daniel. You know that, don't you? It's the last day." "I'm going to do it today then," Daniel responded. He looked at Anna. "We're going to do this today. Right?" Anna smiled. "Yes. The pastor is here. It's probably a good idea." Daniel turned his gaze back to the lawyer. "Okay, you've harangued me about it and I've given you my plan. Can we go to the funeral now? That is my friend being buried there." Henry nodded, slapping a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "John was a friend of mine too, Daniel. Married me and the missus, you know. He won't be forgotten. We'll have to put up a statue for him." Daniel laughed, to Anna's surprise. "I think that's the last thing on the planet John would want, don't you, Henry?" The lawyer let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "I think you're probably right about that. He never did like that kind of attention, did he?" No, he hated flattery. Honesty, he could handle. Not flattery. Anna listened to them banter back and forth, sharing anecdotes quietly as they walked toward the gravesite. She stood patiently by Daniel's side through the funeral, feeling a heavy sadness in her heart, even though she hadn't known the pastor. She could tell how devastated Daniel was by the loss. His sisters were less affected, it seemed, but dabbed at their eyes during the sermon. When it was over, and the coffin was lowered into the ground, the people began to disperse. Daniel took Anna's hand, walking with her to the pastor, who was taking off his garb. "We need your help, Pastor," he said, getting the older man's attention. The pastor looked up at him and smiled. He was a thin man with a wrinkled face and short white hair all around his head. "What can I do for you two young people?" "We need to get married," Daniel replied. "But my friend here," he turned and gestured at the casket, "isn't able to do it for me. Would you do me the honors? I'm trying to marry this little woman right here." Anna blushed, enjoying the term of endearment. "You know I can do that for you. I'll be staying here in Boone's Gulch for a time to replace the pastor while the rebuilding of the church is going on. I may decide to stay longer or someone else will take my place. I'm sure we can. We need to have it done today." Anna was surprised how calm his tone was, knowing the dire nature of his situation. If they didn't marry before sundown, he and his sisters would be broke and living on the streets, all their money going to various charities. The pastor looked at Daniel curiously. "Today? We've just buried your friend." "I don't really want to delve into the reasons why it has to be today, Pastor. I can only tell you, I'd appreciate it if you would make me this woman's husband by the end of the day today. If you need time to prepare a sermon, you can. As long as it doesn't take longer than an hour." While they were talking, Anna began to notice the movement around her had almost ceased. She swept her eyes around the crowd. They were all paying attention to Daniel and the new pastor. She hadn't expected that. With what seemed like a sudden surge, they all headed back to the gravesite where Daniel and the pastor were standing. "I think it's an excellent idea for you to do it here," Henry said, nodding. "It will settle the terms, and you'll still have your friend John by your side to bless the sanctity of your marriage. If not physically, then at least in spirit." Daniel looked at the pastor. "What do you say? Will you please marry us? Right here and now?" Anna lightly bit the inside of her cheek, anxious for the answer. The pastor moved his eyes across the crowd, a smile on his face. "Well, if you all insist, I don't see why we can't have the wedding right here in a cemetery. Are you all right with that, young lady?" Anna looked up at Daniel. "I am sure of it. I don't care where we get married, I just want to be this man's wife. I can make that possible for you. Everyone, if you'd care to gather around, we can make these two an official couple in the eyes of God and man." Anna felt swept away in the motions. She recited what the pastor told her to, all the while staring into the eyes of the man who would be her husband. Daniel's gaze was so loving, so kind. She'd been blessed and she knew it. Not every woman in her situation ended up dodging the bullet, and then catching the brass ring the next go-round. Anna would leave the cemetery that day, a wedded woman, on her way to a brand new life with a husband and 3 sisters-in-law that she cared for deeply. It felt like the ruined wedding she'd been about to have was ages ago. The memory didn't cause her pain anymore. Now she only felt relief. That she hadn't married Sean, who now struck her as being pious and condescending, was the greatest relief of all. And when Daniel kissed her at the behest of the pastor, she felt a tingle slide through her body that could only indicate wonderful things to come in the future. Daniel pulled back from the kiss, but leaned forward to pull her into a hug. "I love you, Anna Dawson West," he said into her ear, sending chills over her entire body. "I love you too, Daniel West," she whispered back, feeling an overwhelming love fill her to the brim. Epilogue. "All right, let's see that paintbrush." Emma and Rose were standing on ladders, their hair pulled back under handkerchiefs, paint specks on the front of their aprons. They were splashing it on the walls, creating what they thought would be a colorful display of vibrance and energy. That was how they put it to Anna. Rose gave Emma the brush she asked for, and Emma proceeded to draw a heart with wings and paint on the wall. "Are you going to leave it like that?" Rose asked, surveying it with a sober look on her face. She was pretending to be serious, and Emma was going along with the game. Anna observed the two sisters playing with each other with a sense of delight. It had been 6 months since the earthquake, and Anna had become pregnant almost right away. 2 of her sisters-in-law were helping her put together a nursery. So far it was empty other than several cans of paint, brushes, and a tarp that had been thrown over the hardwood floor. A big rug would be put down over it, so the baby wouldn't hurt him or herself while playing. The furniture Daniel had purchased was all sitting out in the hallway, waiting for its chance to come in. "The baby will be here before you two finish the walls," Anna teased. "I may just have to do it myself." Emma gasped, giving Anna a wounded look. "We're just trying to help." "I'm just teasing. I'm anxious to see it when it's all put together." "I am too." Rose finished the spot she'd been covering, and stepped back to survey her work. Anna didn't think there was a thing wrong with it. Emma looked at her heart with wings, an amused look on her face. A moment later, she was painting over it vigorously. "We'll make them all look the same, yes we will." "Hello, ladies." All 3 of them turned to see Daniel coming through the door. Anna's heart pounded at the sight of her handsome husband. "How are my ladies today?" he asked, walking straight to Anna, placing one hand on her protruding belly and leaning forward to kiss her lightly on the lips. "How are you today, my dear?" "I'm feeling okay. No problems at all." "You look very excited." She thought there was a spark in his eyes she only saw when he had wonderful news. It was the same way he'd looked when he announced they were going to have a baby. Since it couldn't be that again, something else must have put the twinkle in his eyes. "I am excited," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist and hugging her gently. "I've got the most beautiful wife in the world, and 3 great sisters to keep me on track." Anna pursed her lips, narrowing her eyes at the same time. Yes, but there's something else." "There's something you're not telling me." Daniel tried to look innocent, which made Anna even more curious. "I don't know what you're talking about, Anna. You won't get it out of me." "So there is something," she pressed enthusiastically. "You have to tell me. You're going to drive me nuts. I don't think I'm supposed to lose my mind while pregnant, because my ornery husband won't share the ideas that I..." He held up his hand and she stopped talking. His sisters were looking at him just as closely. They were all anxious to hear what he had to say. With the hand that was lifted in the air, Daniel pulled a folded letter in an envelope out of his vest pocket. "What's that?" Anna asked suspiciously, eyeing it warily. "This is a letter I just received from New York. I'm going to be published." Anna felt a thrill spill through her. She clapped her hands together lightly and hopped a little in place. "My husband, the author. I love the sound of it. Oh, I'm so excited for you." "What are they publishing, brother dear?" Rose said. She and Emma were next to their brother a moment later. "I didn't know you'd written something for publication," Emma exclaimed. Daniel grinned wide, pulling the letter from the envelope and unfolding it. He turned it around, rather than reading it to them, and pointed to the area he wanted them to see. "I wrote an account of what happened during the earthquake last year. Recounting the loss of Pastor John, how we got married at the cemetery when we rescued Bradley." "We didn't rescue him," Anna said firmly. "You saved him. I was merely there to support you." "And a wonderful job you did of that," Daniel said warmly, leaning to kiss her on the lips. "The best thing about this, ladies, is that this is money that can't be taken from us. Uncle Clarence probably never expected me to find such a wonderful woman in the short amount of time he'd given me. But I found a diamond in the coal, the best of the package." Anna's skin tingled when he brushed his fingers over her cheek. "I dedicated this book to you, Anna." She gasped. "Oh, Daniel. You are an inspiration." I feel like I can do anything when you're around. And now we're starting our family. I just couldn't be a happier man. I'm so glad you answered my ad and came to me. We should leave them alone to have some time together, Emma said, tugging on her sister's sleeve. Daniel shook his head, stopping them from leaving. No. I want the two of you here. Actually, I want to have dinner to celebrate this success. Where's Amelia? She's tending to the flowers outside, Emma answered. Let's go get her and head into town. I want to share the news with everyone. Just like I shared the news of my bride. Anna's grin nearly broke her cheeks. Happily, she put her arm around Daniel's waist and the family left the nursery for another time.
I hope you've enjoyed this latest production. Don't forget to subscribe and to ring the bell to be notified of new releases.